Hey guys, tonight we are stepping away from the gilded storybooks and plunging headfirst into the murky, uncomfortable, and often brutal world of medieval kings. We're going to peel back the layers of myth and noble quests, the shining armor, the wise rulers, and look at the raw, unfiltered reality of power in an age defined by it. Frankly, if we were really time traveling, your modern sensibilities and lack of immunity too, well, everything would probably mean you wouldn't last the first day. But from the safety of your bed, we can explore it all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Alright. The first thing you need to do is forget everything you think you know. Forget the sprawling, clean castles from the movies, with pennants fluttering cheerfully in a gentle breeze. Forget the knights in polished, gleaming plate mail and the ladies with perfect hair, gossiping in sun-drenched courtyards. That's the theme park version. The reality you're stepping into is different. Picture this, you're standing on a path. Except it's not really a path, it's more like a suggestion of solid ground amidst a sea of mud. It's a deep, greedy, churned-up mud, a mix of dirt, straw, animal dung, and things you do rather not identify. It clings to your simple leather shoes and tries to suck them off with every step. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and the close, unwashed scent of humanity. It's not necessarily foul, not yet, but it's heavy and organic. You're wearing coarse wool, and it's a bit scratchy against your skin, holding the dampness of the perpetually overcast sky. This is the baseline. This is the baseline. This is the world that 99% of people inhabit. Life here is a conversation with the soil, under constant, low-level prayer to avoid sickness or starvation. The sun, when it appears, is a cause for genuine celebration. A dry day is a blessing. Your world is small, you might live and die without ever traveling more than 20 miles from where you stand right now. And hovering over all of it, like a distant mountain or a threatening storm cloud, is the idea of the king. You've never seen him. You likely never will. To you, he is not a man, but a force of nature, a concept. His existence is felt not through grand pronouncements, but through the gruff, unsmiling face of the local reeve who comes to collect taxes. It's felt in the nervously shared room with a neighboring lord, and that might mean a war is coming, a war that could trample your fields and demand your sons. His justice is a fearsome thing, administered by men who carry his authority like a club. This is the fundamental truth we have to accept before we can understand the cruelty of kings. The world they ruled was already hardened and forgiving. Life was cheap. High fever, a bad harvest, an infected cut, any of these could be a death sentence. In a world so precarious, power wasn't a gentle responsibility, it was a raw, desperate struggle for control. And here's a little detail to add to you in this reality: the darkness. We take light for granted. You are likely in a room with multiple light sources right now. But here, inside one of the simple wattle and daub huts, the only light comes from a small, smoky fire in the center of the room. There are no windows, because glass is an unimaginable luxury. Openings were just let in the cold and the wet. So much of life is lived in shadows, in a perpetual twilight that blurs the edges of the world. This constant gloom shapes a person's outlook, breeding a familiarity with the dark and a deep-seated suspicion of what might be lurking within it. Now historians still get a little feisty about calling this entire period the Dark Ages. It's a term that has fallen out of favor in academic circles, and for good reason. They argue, quite rightly, that it wasn't uniformly dark. This was the age that saw the birth of early universities, stunning advances in architecture with the Gothic cathedrals, and complex new systems of law and philosophy. To label it all as a period of ignorant regression is, they say, a bit of a smear campaign started by later Renaissance thinkers who wanted to make themselves look extra brilliant by comparison. They prefer terms like early Middle Ages, but for our purposes, for understanding the mindset of a tyrant, dark is a useful emotional shorthand. Because for the average person living under a cruel king, it certainly felt dark. The king did not rule a land of happy, prosperous citizens. He ruled over a fragile, superstitious, and often desperate population. And in a world built on such a knife's edge, a single man's paranoia, his greed, or his temper could tip the entire balance, plunging thousands into a deeper, more personal kind of darkness. The cruelty of a king wasn't an aberration, it was a feature of a system where absolute power was wielded in a world of absolute uncertainty. Your meager hopes, they all existed subject to the whim of that one distant crowned figure, and the crown he wore was heavier and far more terrifying than any fairy tale ever told you. But now let's leave that muddy path and the smoky hut behind. Let's trade your coarse, damp wool for heavy velvet and soft ermine fur. You are no longer the farmer looking up at the distant concept of a king. You are the king, and you're about to discover that the crown is less a piece of jewelry and more a crushing weight, both literally and figuratively. You're kneeling. The stone floor of the great cathedral is cold, and it seeps through the thin fabric at your knees. The air, unlike the thick, earthy air of the village, is a different kind of heavy. It's dense with the sweet, cloying smell of incense and the ghostly scent of melting beeswax from 1,000 candles. The sound is immense, echoing in the vaulted stone ceiling high above you, a choir of voices singing in Latin, a language you might only barely understand. But the sound itself is designed to communicate one thing: solemn divine power. An old man in magnificent robes approaches. He holds a small, ornate vessel. This is it, the most sacred part of the ceremony. He dips his thumb into the vessel and anoints you with holy oil, the chrism. He touches your forehead, your chest, your shoulders. The oil is cool on your skin, and it carries a strange, ancient scent. In this moment, something profound is supposed to be happening. A magical, holy transecrated. You are being set apart from all other mortals. Congratulations. You've just been handed the most stressful, paranoia-inducing job on the planet, all wrapped up in a glorious concept called the divine right of kings. This isn't just a fancy way of saying I'm the boss. It's a worldview. It means you were chosen by God, personally, to rule this land. Your authority doesn't come from the nobles, it certainly doesn't come from a constitution, because that doesn't exist. It comes directly from heaven. Your bloodline is sacred. Your body is now a holy vessel, the body politic. This is why a king's person is considered inviolable. To strike you isn't just assault, it's blasphemy. This belief system is your greatest weapon. When a powerful duke questions your new tax, you can frame it not as a political disagreement, but as the duke questioning God's will. Who would dare? It's the ultimate trump card, but it's also a cage. Because if you are God's chosen, what happens when things go wrong? If a famine sweeps the land? Is it just bad weather, or is it a sign of God's displeasure with you? If you lose a battle, did your strategy fail? Or did your piety fail? You are living in a state of perpetual, high-stakes judgment. Every success is proof of divine favor. Every failure that God might be having second thoughts. This creates a deep, gnawing insecurity. You have to constantly prove you are worthy of the divine mandate. You have to be strong, you have to be successful. You have to be unwavering. Mercy can look like weakness. Compromise can look like a lack of faith in your own divine appointment. And to bolster this image, you have to perform. Here's a bizarre little piece of your new job description: you are now a faith healer. For centuries, it was believed the touch of a rightful king, particularly in England and France, could cure a nasty skin disease called desirabula, known as the king's evil. So on designated days, you will have to stand for hours as a long line of sick, desperate people are brought before you. You will have to touch their sores, their swollen gland, and recite a prayer over them. It's a public relations masterstroke, a living demonstration of your sacred status. But imagine the pressure. You, a mortal man with your own doubts and fears, having to play the part of a holy conduit, hoping no one notices you're just as human as they are. This brings us to a debate that historians still chew on. Did you, the newly anointed king, actually believe all this? Did you truly, in your heart of hearts, think you were a semi-divine being chosen by God, or was it the most sophisticated and effective piece of political propaganda ever devised? The argument for belief is strong. You've been raised in this system. Everyone around you, from your mother to your tutors to the highest clergy, has reinforced this idea since you were a child. The world is steeped in faith and superstition. It would be stranger if you didn't believe it. For a king who genuinely believes his cruelty can come from a place of righteous, terrifying certainty. When he executes a traitor, he is not just removing a threat, he is cleansing the kingdom of a spiritual poison, acting as God's righteous sword. But the argument for cynical manipulation is just as compelling. Perhaps you are smart enough to see the system for what it is, a justification for absolute power. The divine right is a shield you hold up to deflect any challenge. It's an excuse to crush your rivals, seize land, and declare wars, all while claiming you're just carrying out a higher purpose. For this kind of king, cruelty is not a matter of religious duty, but of cold, hard calculation. It's a tool, used to maintain fear and order. The truth, for most kings, was likely a murky, confusing blend of both. A cocktail of genuine piety, deep-seated insecurity, and a healthy dose of political cunning. But regardless of the motivation, the result is the same. The belief that you are above all other men, answerable only to God, is a profoundly isolating, uncorrupting force. It separates you from the humanity of your subjects. Their lives become pieces on your grand, divinely sanctioned chessboard. And when you believe you're playing a game for God's favor, you'll sacrifice any pawn without a second thought. That anointing oil hasn't just made you a king, it has made you dangerously, terrifyingly alone. And your first task, now that you have the crown, is to make sure no one takes it from you. The echoes of the choir have faded, the smell of incense is gone, but the weight of the crown remains. It's a physical presence on your head and a metaphorical one on your soul. You are king. But the anointing ceremony was the easy part. The real work begins now, and it's not about divine rights or sacred duties. It's about brute survival. Because you weren't the only one who wanted this crown. Look around the great hall during your coronation feast. The long tables are groaning with roasted boar, swan's ray feathered after cooking, and pyramids of spiced cakes. The wine, a rare luxury for most, flows freely for your guests. The air is loud with forced merriment, with lords and ladies laughing a little too loudly, their eyes darting around. Don't be fooled by the smiles and the toasts of loyalty. This room is a viper's nest. Every person here is calculating, assessing your strength, your weaknesses, and their own opportunities. Let's focus on one table in particular. There, sitting in a place of high honor, is your uncle. He has a warm smile and a booming laugh. He was the first to bend the knee and swear fealty after your father, the old king, died. He even placed a comforting hand on your shoulder during the funeral, whispering words of support. His wife, your aunt, is talking graciously with the bishop, a picture of pious nobility. You know, and everyone else in this room knows, that your uncle believed he should have been king. Your claim to the throne as the direct heir might be stronger by the laws of primogeniture, but laws are just ideas. His claim rests on something more tangible: experience, alliances, and ambition. He is a proven military commander. The lords of the northern provinces respect him. He thinks you're too young, too soft, too untested. He is smiling at you, but in his mind, he is sitting on your throne. This is the first, most brutal reality of medieval rule. The line of succession is less a clear-cut rule and more a bloody, violent argument that happens every time a king dies. Your closest relatives are your most dangerous rivals. A brother, an uncle, a cousin, they share the same sacred blood as you, which gives them a plausible claim. All they need is an opportunity, a moment of weakness on your part to make their move. So what do? You've been king for a day, and you already face a choice that will define your reign. You can try to win him over. Give him more lands, a prestigious title, maybe marry one of your children to his. Appease him. Show him that loyalty will be richly rewarded. This is the path of mercy, of conciliation. But it's risky. Every gift you give him makes him stronger. Every concession can be interpreted as weakness. You're essentially feeding a wolf in the hope that it will behave like a dog. Or you can choose the other path, the path of cruelty, the path of certainty. You wait, you let the feast continue. You smile back at your uncle, raise your goblet to him in a toast. You play your part. But you've already given the quiet order to the captain of your personal guard, a man whose loyalty is to you and you alone, but with a mountain of silver and the promise of more. Later that night, when the castle is quiet and the wine has done its work, there's a quiet knock on your uncle's chamber door. Not a thunderous demand, just a soft, insistent tapping. His guards, perhaps bribed or simply outnumbered, step aside. The door opens. There are no grand speeches, no accusations, just a few grim-faced men with sharp knives. It's over quickly and quietly. By morning, a story will be circulated. A terrible, tragic accident. Your beloved uncle, unsteady from the celebratory wine, stumbled and fell down a stone staircase. A great loss to the kingdom. You will order a week of mourning and a lavish state funeral. You will look suitably devastated. This is the cold arithmetic of power. By eliminating your uncle, you haven't just removed a rival. You've sent a message to everyone else in that feasting hall. You have shown them that you are not the soft, untested boy they thought you were. You have demonstrated that you are willing to be ruthless to protect your crown, and that blood ties mean nothing when weighed against your authority. You have traded a potential future war for a single, quiet act of brutality. It's a disgusting, stomach-turning choice. But from a purely strategic standpoint, it's brutally effective. This is how dynasties are secured. History is littered with unfortunate accidents befalling royal relatives. King John of England is widely believed to have murdered his nephew, Arthur of Brittany, who had a strong claim to the throne. The fate of the princes in the Tower, the young sons of King Edward IV who vanished after their uncle, Richard II, took the throne, is one of history's most enduring and chilling mysteries. Historians still debate the specific guilt in many of these cases. Was Richard II truly the heartless villain Shakespeare painted him to be, or was he a victim of later-to propaganda? The evidence is oft unsubstantial, whispered accusations in chronicles written by the victors. The truth is often lost to time, but the pattern is undeniable. The most dangerous place to be in a medieval court was second in line to the throne. So use it on your throne, the day after your coronation, and you receive the lords who come to offer their condolences for your uncle's accident. You see the look in their eyes. It's not loyalty. It's fear, and for now, that's much more useful. You've survived your first test, but you've paid a price. A piece of your own humanity, traded for a little more security, and you are quickly learning that the crown will demand many more such payments. The blood or the rumor of blood is still drying, and you've established a baseline of fear. Good. But fear, like a fire, needs to be constantly fed or it dies out. A single, dramatic act of ruthlessness buys you time, but it doesn't buy you control. Now you need to build the infrastructure of paranoia. You need to turn your entire court, your entire kingdom, into a web where you are the spider at the center, feeling every tiny vibration. Welcome to the world of medieval espionage. You can't be everywhere at once. You can't hear every whispered conversation in every tavern, every disgruntled mutter in a lord's private solar. But you need to, because the next threat won't come from an obvious rival with a clear claim to the throne. It will come from a cabal of discontented barons who think you're taxing them too heavily. It will come from a bishop who secretly believes your cousin in a foreign court would be a more pious king. It will come from the quiet resentment that festers when people feel they can complain without consequence. So you start recruiting. But you don't recruit the obvious people. The powerful dukes and earls are too ambitious themselves. You need people who are invisible. People who are motivated by things other than landed titles. Your gaze falls upon the servants, the boy who pours your wine, the girl who mends the queen's dresses, the stable hand who listens to the knight's gossip as he grooms their horses. They are the background scenery of courtly life. The nobility barely notices them, speaking freely in their presence as if they were furniture, but they have ears, and they are often poor. A few silver coins, more than they earn in a year, can turn a silent servant into your personal listening post. You create a network of informants, people who report directly to a trusted spy master, perhaps that same grim-faced captain of the guard who handled your uncle problem. Then you expand your reach. You cultivate horses in the church. Monks and friars travel constantly. They hear confessions. They carry messages between monasteries. They are a medieval information superhighway. By granting a particular order special favors a piece of land, exemption from attacks, you earn their loyalty. The abbot of a major monastery might become one of your most valuable intelligence assets, passing on juicy tidbits of political gossip he picks up from traveling clergymen. It's a dirty business. You are weaponizing the confessional, turning piety into policy. You are corrupting the very fabric of the society you are supposed to protect. But you tell yourself it's necessary. How else can you know if the Earl of Northumberland is secretly corresponding with the King of Scotland? How else can you discover that 3 of your southern barons are planning to refuse your call to arms for the next campaign? You're not just listening for plots against your life, you're listening for any challenge to your authority. And here's a quirky and slightly chilling little fact about this network. Sometimes you have to test it. You might intentionally leak a piece of false information to a specific person, a minor lord you have some doubts about. You tell him in the strictest confidence that you plan to raise a new, deeply unpopular tax. Then you wait. You listen to your network. If a week later you hear whispers of that exact tax from 3 different, unrelated sources, you've learned 2 things. Your network is working beautifully. Second, that minor lord cannot be trusted. You've caught him without him ever knowing he was being tested. The effect of all this is profound. It creates an atmosphere of pervasive, suffocating mistrust. No one feels safe. The lords start to look at their own servants with suspicion. They become guarded in their speech, even in their own homes. Who might be listening that visiting Monk the new stable boy, they start to fear that you, the king, are omniscient, that you have eyes and ears everywhere. This is far more powerful than just executing a rival. You're not just controlling their actions, you're controlling their thoughts. They begin to police themselves. Historians still argue about how formalized these spy networks actually were. Were they highly organized, centrally controlled agencies like a medieval MI6, or were they much more ad hoc, a messy collection of paid informants, loyal friends, and people currying favor? All reports advisor in a disorganized fashion. The evidence is murky. Spying, by its very nature, doesn't leave a clean paper trail. Rulers like King Francis I of France were known for their extensive cabinet noir or black chamber, where letters could be secretly opened, read, and resealed. But for many earlier kings, the system was likely far more personal and chaotic. The problem with ruling by fear is that it's a feedback loop. The more you rely on spies and secret information, the more you retreat into a world of shadows and whispers. You trust no one. You see potential plots everywhere. A simple meeting between 2 lords could be a harmless discussion about a hunting trip, or it could be the beginning of a conspiracy. A letter from your sister, married to a foreign duke, could be simple family correspondence, or it could contain a coded message. Your paranoia grows. You begin to trust the whispers of your low-born spies more than the sworn oaths of your high-born vassals. You become isolated, trapped in your own web. You might summon a baron to court based on a flimsy report from a disgruntled servant. The baron, innocent of any wrongdoing, arrives confused and afraid. He sees the suspicion in your eyes. He leaves feeling alienated and resentful. And just like that, you have turned a potentially loyal subject into a potentially loyal subject into a potential enemy. Designed to prevent treason is now actively creating it. You sit in your private chamber, reading the secret reports written on scraps of parchment. You have the illusion of control, of knowing everything. But in reality, you are a prisoner of your own system. The crown is heavy, but the weight of constant, unending suspicion is heavier still, and you are bearing it all alone. This growing paranoia, this sense of being separate from everyone else, is amplified by a very strange and specific medieval concept that you, as king, must now embody, the idea of the kings to bodies. It's one of the more mind-bending bits of political theory from the era, and it goes a long way in explaining how a king could be both a man and a monster. Here's the theory in a nutshell. You are not one person. You are 2. First, there is your body natural. This is you. The man, the person who gets tired, catches colds, feels hunger, and has moments of doubt and fear. This is the body that can be weak, foolish, and mortal. It will age, sicken, and one day, it will die and be buried in the cold earth. But then there is your body politic. This is the other you, the eternal you. This body is the physical representation of the kingdom itself. It is the vessel of sovereignty, majesty, and divine authority. The body politic cannot get sick. It never dies. When your body natural perishes, the body politic is instantly transferred to your heir. This is the meaning behind the famous declaration, "The king is dead. Long live the king," but the immortal office continues without a single moment's interruption. This isn't just abstract philosophy, it has real, tangible consequences for how you live and how you rule. It creates a kind of divine schizophrenia. When you make a decision, is it you, the man, making it, or is it the crown, the body politic, acting through you? Let's say you want to seize the land of a wealthy baron who has displeased you. As a man, this is simple theft, driven by greed or spite. It's a sin. But if you are acting as the body politic, the embodiment of the kingdom, the act is transformed. You are not stealing for yourself, you are reclaiming assets for the good of the realm. You are acting on behalf of an immortal entity. The sin is erased, or at least conveniently repackaged, as a political necessity. This is an incredibly useful mental trick. It allows you to separate your personal morality from your official actions. You, the man, might feel a pang of guilt, but you, the king, are just doing your job. This dual identity explains how kings could attend mass in the morning, appearing genuinely devout and praying for their mortal soul, and then spend the afternoon signing a death warrant for a man on flimsy evidence. In their minds, these two actions were performed by two different entities. The body natural seeks salvation. The body politic seeks security. And if the security of the realm, the body politic, requires an act of cruelty, then it must be done. The personal feelings of the body natural are irrelevant. Now here's the slightly bizarre, almost comical, extension of this idea. Because your body natural is so closely linked to the immortal body politic, even its most mundane functions take on a bizarre, ritualistic significance. Your life is not your own. You wake up, and high-ranking nobles are there, waiting to hand you your shirt. This is the levee, a formal ceremony of waking and dressing. You eat, and it's a public performance, with specific people assigned to hand you your napkin or cup. Even the most private bodily functions could be attended by ceremony. A surprising number of powerful court positions evolved from what were, essentially, very personal, domestic servant roles. The position of groom of the stool, for example, was one of the most intimate and, oddly, powerful positions in the Tudor court. This was the man tasked with assisting the king with his toilet. Because he had such private, unguarded access to the king, his influence was enormous. He was the ultimate insider. This constant public performance of your life erodes any sense of a normal human existence. Every action, from getting dressed to eating a meal, is a piece of political theater, reinforcing your unique, dual status. You are a symbol as much as you are a man. And this is where academics still have lively debates. The concept of the king's two bodies was most famously articulated by an Elizabethan jurist named Edmund Plowden, so it was a very late medieval or early modern idea in its fully developed form. The question historians ask is, how far back does this way of thinking go? Were earlier medieval kings, like William the Conqueror or Henry II, operating with this same clear-cut mental division, or was it a more primal, less philosophical sense of "I am the king, therefore my will is the law"? The argument is that, while they might not have used the fancy Latin terms, the fundamental idea was already there. The anointing with holy oil set the king apart, creating that dual identity from the very beginning. The idea that an attack on the king's body was a special kind of crime, treason, shows that his physical person was seen as more than just flesh and blood. It was synonymous with the realm itself. This concept is the ultimate justification for tyranny. It allows a king to commit acts of appalling cruelty while maintaining a clear conscience. He can convince himself that his brutal actions are not his own, but are the necessary work of the eternal, dispassionate state which he represents. He persecutes a religious minority, not out of personal hatred, but because the body politic requires religious uniformity. He executes a dozen rebellious peasants, not out of anger, but because the body politic must demonstrate that order will be maintained at any cost. He becomes an instrument of a power he believes to be greater than himself, and in doing so, he can absolve himself of the human consequences. The man inside the king might be terrified, lonely, and wrecked with guilt, but the body politic is implacable. It is the crown, the throne, the kingdom, and it demands a terrible price from the mortal man who is tasked with wearing it. This idea of the king's two bodies, this separation of your personal morality from your official function, bleeds directly into one of the most terrifying aspects of your rule, the administration of justice. Notice the quotation marks, because what you call justice and what a modern person would call justice are two wildly different things. Your justice system is not designed to find the truth. It's designed to enforce your authority. Let's imagine a crime has been committed. A tax collector has been found dead on a road in a small village. This is a serious offense. It's not just murder, it's an attack on your royal authority, since the tax collector was your representative. The village is terrified. They know the king's wrath is coming. You don't send a team of detectives to carefully gather evidence, interview witnesses, and look for clues. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. You send a royally appointed magistrate, a justice of the peace, backed by a troop of armed men. His job is to resolve the crime. His job is to resolve the crime, quickly and decisively, in a way that demonstrates the power of the crown. The villagers are rounded up. There are no rights to remain silent, no lawyers. The magistrate begins his inquiry, which is mostly just shouting on threats. Under duress, a few villagers point a finger at loud complaints about the new taxes. Let's call him John. John is probably innocent. Maybe he complained, but that doesn't make him a killer. It doesn't matter. A suspect has been identified. Now comes the trial. And this is where things get truly strange. Instead of a trial by jury where evidence is presented, John might be subjected to a trial by ordeal. This was a common practice in the early medieval period, a way of asking God to directly intervene and reveal the verdict. You might force John to carry a red-hot bar of iron for 10 paces. His hand is then bandaged and sealed. 3 days later, the bandage is removed in the presence of a priest. If the wound is healing cleanly, God has declared him innocent. If it's festering and infected, which, given the state of medieval hygiene, is almost guaranteed he is guilty, or perhaps you'll use trial by water. John is bound hand and foot and thrown into a river. Here's the wonderfully perverse logic: water was considered a pure element, so it would reject a guilty sinner. Therefore, if he floats, hes guilty and hauled out to be executed. If he sinks, he is innocent. He is, of course, also likely drowned, but his soul is pure and his innocence has been proven. A small consolation for John's family. This seems utterly insane to us, a cruel and random way to determine guilt. But you have to understand the mindset. In a world where you believe God is an active participant in human affairs, this makes a twisted kind of sense. It's the ultimate delegation of responsibility. You, the king, aren't even making the decision. You're creating a situation where God has to show his hand. It reinforces your pious image while conveniently dealing with a troublemaker. The church officially condemned trial by ordeal, seeing it as tempting God, but the practice lingered in folk justice for a long time after. Now, let's say you're in a slightly more enlightened period and the ordeal is out of fashion. The trial might be a more recognizable affair, but it's still stacked against the accused. The accuser's word often holds more weight than the defendant's. Without a confession, however, a conviction can be difficult. So, you need a confession, and you have ways of getting one. This is where the line between justice and simple, brutal coercion completely disappears. The accused can be tortured, not necessarily out of sadism, but as a legal tool. The theory was that a person would not confess to a crime they didn't commit, even under duress. We now know this is demonstrably false. A person under extreme pain will say anything to make it stop. But for you, the king, a confession, however it is obtained, provides the legal justification you need. Let's go back to poor John. He has been tortured, and he has confessed. The trial is a formality. The sentence itself is another performance. He won't be quietly executed in a prison yard. He will be hanged publicly, in the village square, as a lesson to everyone. His death is a piece of political theatre, a brutal and effective piece of royal communication that says, this is what happens when you defy me. Here's a little known and rather grim fact about medieval law: the concept of outlawry. If a person accused of a serious crime refused to appear in court, they could be declared an outlaw. This didn't just mean they were a fugitive. It meant they were no longer under the protection of the law. They were no longer under the protection of the law. They were legally a wolf's head, an animal to be hunted. It was a terrifyingly efficient way of dealing with fugitives, effectively crowdsourcing the state's monopoly on violence. Historians are still in a lively discussion about the degree to which medieval people actually believed in the fairness of their own legal systems. Was the trial by ordeal genuinely seen as God's will by all? Or was it a tool used by the powerful that the common folk knew was a sham? Did the nobles who sat in judgment truly think they were upholding justice? Or were they consciously participating in a system designed to protect their own interests and the king's power? The chronicles written by monks often praise the stern justice of a strong king, seeing it as a sign of good governance and a way to keep the peace. But folk tales and ballads like those of Robin Hood tell a different story. They paint a picture of royal law as arbitrary, cruel, and something to be fought against. This suggests a deep cynicism among the common people about the king's justice. As king, you are the fountainhead of all justice in the realm. But the stream that flows from you is not paranoia, self-interest, and the overriding need to maintain control. Every trial, every sentence, every public execution is a reinforcement of your power. Justice is not about right and wrong. It's about reminding everyone, in the most visceral way possible, who is in charge. The public performance of your justice is one tool. But some messages are best delivered not in the open town square, but in the deep, quiet dark. Every castle, but symbol of your power and supposed safety, has a shadow self. Beneath the great halls, the solar chambers, and the bustling kitchens lies another world, a place that exists to contain everything your kingdom fears: criminals, traitors, and political inconveniences. Let's go down into the dungeon. Forget the Hollywood version of a dungeon with its neatly organized cells, each with its own barred door and a sympathetic jailer. That's far too orderly, far too resource-intensive. For most of medieval history, a castle's dungeon was simply a hole. You follow a guard down a tight, spiraling stone staircase. The air grows cold and damp, clinging to you, and it carries a new smell, not the healthy scent of earth, but the dead, stagnant smell of mold, human waste, and despair. The torch in the guard's hand sputters, casting huge, dancing shadows that make the narrow passage feel like it's alive and breathing. He stops at a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, and lifts a massive iron bar, and he gestures for you to look down. This isn't a room. It's a pit. The French called it an oubliette from the verb oublier, to forget. That's its purpose. It's a place where people are thrown and forgotten. The drop is maybe 20 feet. There's no door at the bottom, no stairs. Food, if any is provided, is lowered down in a bucket. The floor is slick with moisture and filth. Down there in the flickering torchlight, you see shapes. Men, huddled together for warmth, their clothes reduced to rags. Their beards matted, their eyes wide in the sudden, unwelcome light. This is where you put people you don't want to kill, but you don't want to release. Perhaps it's a captured knight whose family is too poor to pay a ransom. Perhaps it's a political rival you don't want to make a martyr of by executing him publicly. So you push him here. You let the damp, the darkness, and the disease do the work for you. It's a slow, quiet, anonymous death sentence. No trial, no executioner, no messy public spectacle. Not all dungeons were simple pits, of course. Some were repurposed storerooms in the base of a tower. Here, prisoners might be chained to the wall. The chains are short, forcing them to either stand or sit in an awkward, cramped position. The stone walls sweat with moisture. Rats, bold and fat, skitter in the darkness, their claws making a scratching sound that becomes the soundtrack of the prisoner's existence. And here's a grim little fact that highlights the sheer misery, the lack of sanitation. There are no toilets. Prisoners lived in their own accumulating filth. The psychological effect is devastating. It's a deliberate process of dehumanization. By stripping away a person's dignity, by reducing them to a state of animalistic survival, you break their spirit. A proud, defiant lord thrown into these conditions for a few months might emerge a broken, compliant man, willing to sign away his lands, his titles, anything just to see the sun again. The dungeon is not just a holding pen, it's an instrument of psychological warfare. The sensory deprivation, the constant darkness or near darkness, the silence broken only by drips of water and the scuttling of vermin is maddening. A person loses track of time. Days and nights blend into one long, great twilight of suffering. But what about the torture chambers we see in movies? With all their elaborate and terrifying devices, historians have a fascinating debate on this. While torture was certainly used, particularly to extract confessions, the idea of dedicated torture chambers filled with a whole catalogue of purpose-built machines like the Iron Maiden or the rack being a standard feature in every castle is largely a myth. It's a caricature, popularized much later, especially during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, by writers who wanted to portray the Middle Ages as a time of savage barbarity. The reality was often simpler, and in some ways more brutal. Torture was frequently ad hoc, using whatever was on hand, stretching a prisoner with ropes, applying hot irons, or the simple, horrifying effectiveness of sleep deprivation were far more common than some complex mechanical device. The famous Iron Maiden, a coffin-like device with spikes inside, is now believed by most historians to be a fabrication, a ghoulish fantasy created in the 18th century. But there's no real evidence it was ever used in the medieval period. The true horror of your dungeon is not in elaborate, sadistic machinery. It's in the calculated, systematic neglect. It's the slow, grinding erosion of a human being. You, as king, might never set foot in this place. You don't have to. You just have to give the order. Take him to the tower. Everyone knows what it means. Your dungeons serve a dual purpose. For the few who end up inside them, they are a living hell. But their real power is their effect on the thousands who are outside. The existence of the dungeon is a powerful deterrent. Every lord, every merchant, every man who might consider defying you knows that this place exists. They know that a single word from you could have them thrown into that cold, dark, forgotten hole. They may never have seen it, but they can imagine it. And that imagination is enough to ensure their compliance. You walk away from the groaning door of the Owlblight. The guard slams it shut, the heavy bar drops back into place, and the sounds from below are cut off. You ascend the spiral stairs back towards the light and the air of the upper castle. But the chill of that place, the smell of despair, follows you. It's a necessary part of your kingdom, you tell yourself. A cornerstone of the order you provide, but it's a foundation built on human misery, a constant, silent scream trapped in the stones beneath your feet. The dungeon is for the forgotten, the people you want to disappear. But sometimes you need the opposite. You don't want someone to be forgotten, you want them to be made into a spectacle. You need to remind the powerful, ambitious men around you, the ones with their own castles and their own knights, what happens when they cross the line from loyal vassal to traitor. This calls for a different kind of cruelty, one that is very public, highly ritualized, and designed for maximum political impact. Let's stage a public execution of a high-ranking nobleman. This isn't like the hanging of a common peasant in a village square. This is a major state event, planned with all the care of a royal wedding or a coronation. The accused is a duke, one of the most powerful men in your kingdom. Maybe he was caught plotting with a foreign enemy. Maybe he refused to pay a special tax and tried to raise a rebellion. The reason almost doesn't matter. The important thing is that he failed, he was captured, and now he must be punished. First, the setting. You choose a prominent location, like the main courtyard of your most imposing castle, or a field just outside the capital city's walls. You build a large wooden scaffold, high enough for everyone to see. This isn't a shabby gallows, it's a stage. You might even have it draped in black cloth. Invitations, or rather, summonses, are sent to all the other major lords of the realm. On the day of the execution, a crowd gathers. It's a somber, nervous affair. The common folk are kept at a distance by armed guards. The nobles are given a place of honor, close to the scaffold. They stand in their fine clothes, their faces grim and unreadable. They are the true audience of this play. The condemned duke is led out. He is not dragged in rags. He is often allowed to wear fine clothes, a final acknowledgement of his rank. He is also allowed to make a final speech. This is a crucial part of the ritual. You, the king, are taking a calculated risk here. He could use this moment to curse you, to proclaim his innocence, to try and incite the crowd. But that rarely happens. By tradition, the condemned man is expected to confess his sins, acknowledge the justice of his sentence, and ask for the king's forgiveness and prayers for his soul. It's the final act of submission. He is confirming your narrative, admitting that you were right and he was wrong. It's a powerful piece of propaganda. Then comes the act itself. For a commoner, it would be the rope, but for a nobleman, hanging was considered undignified. The preferred method was beheading, by sword or by axe. It was seen as a more honorable death, a warrior's death. The executioner, often a specialist brought in for the occasion, takes his position. The duke kneels, placing his head on a wooden block. There's a moment of absolute silence. The crowd holds its breath. But it doesn't end there. The act is over, but the message needs to be reinforced. The executioner picks up the severed head and holds it up for the crowd, shouting, "Behold, the head of a traitor." This is the gruesome climax. The head might then be placed on a spike and displayed on the castle walls or above the main city gate. It remains there for weeks, maybe months, slowly decaying, a constant, grisly reminder of the price of treason. And here's a particularly macabre little detail of the process: the concept of being hanged, drawn and quartered. This was a sentence reserved for the most heinous cases of high treason, and it was a masterpiece of calculated horror. The victim was first hanged until they were nearly unconscious, but cut down before they died. Then they were disemboweled while still alive, drawn. Their entrails were often burned before their eyes. Finally, their body was beheaded and cut into for pieces, quartered. These pieces, along with the head, were then sent to different cities across the kingdom to be publicly displayed. It was the ultimate desecration of the body, a denial of a proper Christian burial, and the most widespread possible advertisement of the king's power and vengeance. Historians still debate the precise symbolism and the audience's reaction to these events. Were the common people who watched these executions merely morbidly curious, enjoying a day of grim entertainment, or did they feel a sense of terror, a confirmation of their own powerlessness? And what about the nobles? The intended audience? Did watching a peer be so brutally dispatched genuinely instill loyalty through fear? Some historians argue that it was highly effective. It was a clear and unambiguous demonstration of the consequences of rebellion. It pruned the ambitions of other would-be traitors and reinforced the king's authority in the most visceral way imaginable. Others suggest it could backfire. If the executed nobleman was popular, or if his guilt was questionable, the execution could breed resentment rather than fear. It could turn the victim into a martyr and sow the seeds of future rebellion among his family and allies. The king had to be very careful, judging the political climate before staging such a spectacle. A successful execution solidified power. A miscalculated one could be the beginning of the end. As king, you stand on a balcony overlooking the scaffold. You watch the entire proceeding with a stony, impassive face. You cannot show anger. You must appear as the embodiment of dispassionate, inevitable justice. This is the body politic at work, purging the realm of a threat. The other nobles watch the execution, but they also watch you. They see the head on the spike, and when they return to their own lands, they will remember the high price of disloyalty. You have secured your power not with a quiet murder in a dark stairwell, but with a loud, bloody, and unforgettable performance in the bright light of day. The fear you've cultivated among the nobility is a specialized, high-stakes game. But the vast majority of your subjects are not dukes or barons. They are farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants, and no political ambitions. Your relationship with them is far simpler, and in its own way, far more brutal. It's not about their loyalty, it's about their money. Your entire regime, your wars, your lavish court, your executioners, it all runs on one thing: revenue. And that revenue is squeezed from the people who have the least. Let's get down to the muddy, miserable business of medieval taxation. You, as king, have a fundamental problem. You are expected to live of your own. This is the core principle of medieval finance. It means that, in normal times, you are supposed to fund the entire government from the income of your own personal lands, the crown lands, but this is almost never enough. Life is expensive. And a king's life is astronomically expensive. So you have to find ways to get more money. But you can't just announce a modern-style income tax. That concept doesn't exist. Instead, you have to rely on a patchwork of deeply unpopular and often cruel levies, collected by men who are universally hated. Picture a village. The harvest has been mediocre. A wet summer has led to mildew on the grain. People are already calculating if they'll have enough to last the winter. Then, the sheriff of the local reeve arrives. HES not a friendly local official. He is your man, and HES here for your money. First, there's the toll age. This is a beautifully simple and arbitrary tax. It's a tax you can levy on the towns and manors that are part of your royal domain. There's no fixed rate. You, the king, simply decide you need money, and you toll age your tenants. The reeve goes from door to door, assessing each household and demanding payment. How does he assess it? He basically looks at your house, your tools, your livestock, and makes a judgment. The reeve can be bribed to make a lower assessment, or he can use the threat of a high assessment to extort money for himself. For the villagers, it feels like random, officially sanctioned robbery. Then there are the taxes on movement and trade. You want to take your grain to the market in the next town, you'll pay a toll to cross a bridge. You'll pay a fee to set up a stall in the market. You'll pay a tax on the goods you sell. These little fees, controlled by the king or a local lord he has licensed, chip away at any potential profit. They are a constant, irritating friction on the gears of daily life. But the most hated taxes are the extraordinary ones. These are the taxes you need for a specific purpose, usually a war. To levy a national tax, you might need the consent of the nobles and the church, but once you have it, the collection begins. The most famous and hated of these in England was the poll tax. It was a flat tax on every adult, regardless of their income. To a wealthy lord, the amount was trivial. To a poor peasant family of 5, it could be ruinous. It was a tax like this that famously sparked the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. And here's a particularly nasty little tax, a real piece of creative cruelty: the escotage or shield money. In feudal theory, your vassals owe you military service. They are supposed to show up with their knights and fight for you for, say, 40 days a year, but fighting is disruptive and expensive for them. So you offer them a deal. They can pay you a sum of money, the escotage, instead of performing their military service. This sounds like a win-win. They avoid the danger of war, and you get cash, which you can use to hire professional mercenaries who are often more reliable than feudal levies anyway. But you, as a tyrant king, can abuse this. You can declare a fake war, announce a grand campaign against a rival, call your vassals to arms, and then, at the last minute, allow them all to pay escotage to get out of it. You never intended to fight. The entire war was a fiction, a pretext to legally demand money from your nobility. It's a brilliant, cynical scam. Historians are still debating the efficiency and fairness of these systems. Some argue that, for all their flaws, medieval taxes were actually quite light compared to modern standards. The state was small, and its ability to collect was limited. A lot of people, especially in remote areas, probably evaded taxes altogether. The system was more bark than bite. Others argue that this view misses the point. The problem wasn't just the amount, but the arbitrariness and the brutality of the collection. There was no predictable rule-based system. A tax could be demanded at any time, for any reason, and collected with force. If you couldn't pay, the reeve could seize your property, your only ox, your tools, the very things you needed to make a living. This lack of predictability, The constant threat of a knock on the door from the king's men created a deep-seated anxiety and resentment. You as king are insulated from this. You just see the bags of silver coins arriving at your treasury. You don't see the farmer who had to sell his only cow. You don't see the weaver who had to give up the money he was saving for his daughter's dowry. You only see the numbers that allow you to fund your ambitions. This distance is crucial. It allows you to view your entire kingdom as a resource to be exploited. The common people are not your subjects to be protected, they are an asset to be squeezed. And when they have been squeezed dry, you will simply invent a new, more creative way to take whatever is left. The peasants and merchants are a reliable source of income, but squeezing them dry is a slow, laborious process. It yields a trickle of silver coins. If you want a real flood of wealth, a truly monumental score, you need to go after bigger targets. You need to rob the institutions that have been accumulating riches for centuries. It's time to turn your greedy eyes towards God's own representatives on earth, the church and its military orders. The church is, by a huge margin, the wealthiest landowner in your kingdom. It owns vast tracts of the most fertile land, donated by pious lords and ladies over generations, all seeking to buy their way into heaven. Its monasteries are not just places of prayer, they are massive agricultural enterprises, centers of wool production, and keepers of great libraries and treasures. And crucially, they are traditionally exempt from most royal taxes. The church looks less like a spiritual partner and more like a giant, untaxed treasure chest. So you begin to encroach on its privileges. You might start a dispute with the Pope over who has the right to appoint bishops in your kingdom, the so-called investiture controversy. This isn't just about religious authority. It's about money. Bishops control vast church lands and revenues. If you can appoint your own loyal men as bishops, you can effectively control that wealth. You can demand gifts from your newly appointed bishop, or ensure that a portion of the church's income finds its way into your royal coffers. This is a dangerous game. The church has its own weapons. An archbishop can excommunicate you, casting you out of the church and, in theory, releasing all your subjects from their oaths of loyalty to you. It's a spiritual atom bomb. The Pope could place your entire kingdom under an interdict, forbidding priests from performing services like marriages, baptisms, or funerals. The social and psychological pressure would be immense. Your people, terrified for their immortal souls, might rise up against you. But you can be ruthless. King John of England, when he was in a dispute with the Pope, simply seized all the church lands in his kingdom and took their revenues for himself. He defied excommunication for years. It was a massive gamble, but for a time, it made him incredibly rich. You are walking a tightrope, balancing your greed against the risk of spiritual and political oblivion. But there's an even more tempting target. A group that combines immense wealth with military prowess, making them both a prize and a threat, the Knights Templar. The Templars started out as a pro-monastic order, sworn to protect pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem, but over the centuries they became one of the most powerful organizations in Christendom. Through donations from across Europe, they amassed a staggering amount of land and castles. More importantly, they invented international banking. A lord traveling from France to the Holy Land could deposit his gold at the Paris Temple and receive a letter of credit, which he could then cash in at the Templar preceptor Wynacre. It was brilliant, secure, and it made them fabulously wealthy. They became the bankers to kings and popes, and that was their undoing. You are a king who owes them a lot of money. King Philip IV of France, Philip the Fair, was in exec to the Templars, and he saw their wealth, their secrecy, and their international network as a threat to his own royal power. He didn't just want to tax them, he wanted everything they had. So you devise a plan of breathtaking cruelty and efficiency. On a single day, Friday, October 13th, 1307, yes, this is a major origin of the unlucky Friday, the 13th superstition, you launch a coordinated, kingdom-wide raid. Your men, acting on secret orders, arrest every Templar in the country, from the Grand Master down to the lowest ranking brother. You seize all their property, all their land, all their account books. But you can't just steal from a holy military order. You need a justification. So you launch one of the most vicious smear campaigns in history. You accuse the Templars of heresy. You claim that their secret initiation rites involve denying Christ, spitting on the cross, and worshipping a demonic head named Baphomet. You accuse them of institutionalized depravity. To get the proof you need, you turn to torture. Templar Knights, men who had faced down armies in the Holy Land, are subjected to horrifying torments. They are racked, their feet are roasted over fires, and they are subjected to every cruel invention your torturers can devise. Unsurprising, they are accused of. They confess to everything they are accused of. These confessions, extracted under unimaginable agony, are then used as the legal basis for destroying the entire order. Jacques de Molay, after initially confessing under torture, later recanted his confession publicly. For this, Philip had him slow roasted to death over a fire on an island in the Seine. Historians are still fiercely divided over the Templars' guilt. Were they truly a heretical, corrupt organization whose piety had curdled into something dark, or were they the dims of a greedy and ruthless king who wanted their money and saw them as a state within a state that needed to be eliminated? The vast majority of modern historians fall into the second camp. The charges were likely fabricated, the confessions were worthless, and the entire affair was a brutal, judicially sanctioned heist on a massive scale. The Pope, initially hesitant, was eventually bullied by Philip into dissolving the order. By destroying the Templars, you accomplish several things at once. You erase your massive debts to them. You seize an unbelievable amount of wealth in a single stroke. And you eliminate a powerful, independent organization that could potentially challenge your authority. It is a masterclass in tyrannical statecraft. You have used the mechanisms of justice and the language of piety to carry out a cold-blooded robbery, proving that not even the soldiers of Christ are safe from a king who believes his own needs are the highest law of the land. The treasure you've gained is immense, but it is stained with the ashes of good men. Seizing church lands and crushing military orders fills your treasury with a sudden, glorious flood of gold. But that's a one-time windfall. It's a move you can't make every day. Wars, however, are a constant expense, and your court's appetite for luxury is insatiable. You need a quieter, more insidious way to generate revenue, a method that most of your subjects won't even understand until it's too late. It's time to commit a crime against the very concept of money itself. You're going to debase the currency. Here's how your kingdom's money works. The value of a coin, whether it's a gold florin or a silver penny, is supposed to be based on the actual amount of precious metal it contains. A silver penny should be, well, a penny's worth of silver. People trust this. Their entire economic lives are built on the simple faith that a coin is what it claims to be. This is a faith you are about to shatter. The process is deceptively simple. You issue a royal decree ordering all old coins to be brought to the royal mint. They will be melted down and issued in a new, more modern design, bearing your noble profile. It all sounds very official and routine. But here's the trick: when your mint workers melt down, say, 100 old, pure silver coins, they don't use that silver to make 100 new coins. Instead, they add a cheaper base metal like copper or tin into the molten silver. With this diluted alloy, they can produce 120 coins. These new coins look and feel almost the same as the old ones. They have your stamp on them, declaring them to be legal tender, but they contain less silver. The 20 extra coins that's pure profit for you. It's called seigniorage, and you've just discovered a magical money-making machine. You've created wealth out of thin air, all without having to pass a single unpopular tax. At first, no one notices. A penny is a penny. But soon, the professionals, the money changers, the goldsmiths, the merchants who trade internationally, they catch on. They can feel the difference in weight, or they see the slight difference in color. They know the new coins are junk, and a very old economic law kicks in, something we now call Gresham's law: bad money drives out good. People start hoarding the old, pure silver coins. Why would you spend a good coin when you can pass off a bad one? So the old, trustworthy currency disappears from circulation, tucked away in private stashes. All that's left in the marketplace are your new, debased coins. And as everyone slowly realizes that these coins contain less silver, their confidence evaporates. A baker who used to sell a loaf of bread for 1 penny now needs 2 of your debased pennies to get the same amount of actual silver he needs to buy his flour. This is the insidious cruelty of debasement. It's a hidden tax that falls hardest on the poor. A wealthy lord whose wealth is in his land is insulated from the worst effects. But for a laborer who earns a fixed wage of a few pennies a day, his purchasing power is suddenly cut in half. HES being impoverished by your royal policy, but it's all so confusing and abstract that he doesn't know who to blame. He just knows that his wages don't buy what they used to. The result is widespread economic anxiety, market instability, and a growing sense of being cheated. Here's a specific, and rather sneaky, way this was done. Kings who were particularly clever or cruel would time their debasements carefully. They might borrow a large sum of money in the old, pure currency. Then they would debase the coinage and legally repay the loan using the new, less valuable coins. It was a form of legalized default. King Philip III of France, the same man who destroyed the Templars, was a master of this, earning him the nickname the counterfeit king from his many detractors. The debate among historians on this topic is fascinating. Was currency debasement always a cynical, predatory act by a greedy king, or was it sometimes a desperate, necessary measure? Some historians argue that in times of severe economic stress, like a silver famine when new precious metal was scarce, a king might have had little try and keep the economy from grinding to a halt. It was a bad solution, but perhaps the only one available. Other historians are far more critical. They point out that debasement almost always coincided with a king's need to fund an expensive and often pointless war. It wasn't about economic stewardship, it was about funding personal ambition. They see it as a fundamental breach of the trust between a ruler and his people. The king, who was supposed to be the guarantor of justice and stability, was actively destabilizing the entire economic foundation of his kingdom for his own selfish gain. You, as the counterfeit king, are playing a dangerous game. You might be richer in the short term, but you are destroying something far more valuable than silver trust. Your subjects begin to lose faith in the very money they hold in their hands. This creates a climate of uncertainty that can cripple trade and lead to social unrest. Merchants become reluctant to accept your currency, demanding payment in foreign coins or by barter. You've won a short-term victory. The extra silver you skimmed from the coinage has paid for a new troop of mercenaries. But the long-term cost is immense. You have poisoned the well of public confidence. By stamping your loyal face on a lie, you have told your people that not even the most basic promises of your rule can be trusted. The foundations of your kingdom are not stone and steel, but the faith of your people in your authority. And with every diluted coin that jingles in a peasant's pocket, their foundation cracks a little more. The money you've minted, stolen, and squeezed from your subjects has a primary purpose. While some of it goes to maintaining your luxurious court, the vast majority is poured into the single most expensive and defining activity of a medieval monarch waging war. But these wars are rarely noble crusades for a grand cause. More often than not, they are born from something far more petty and personal: your own vanity, your own desire for glory. Let's start a completely unnecessary war. The pretext can be almost laughably thin. Perhaps a minor border dispute over a few acres of useless marshland, or maybe a distant cousin of yours, married to a foreign princess, complains that he was slighted at a tournament. The most common cause, however, is a dynastic claim. Your great-grandmother was the second daughter of the king of a neighboring realm. That king has now died without a direct male heir. By a complex and highly debatable interpretation of inheritance law, you decide that this makes you the rightful king of that land. Does anyone in your kingdom actually want this war? Do your peasants care, who sit on a foreign throne? Of course not. Do your barons, who have to provide the troops and funds, relish the idea of a long, costly campaign? Unlikely. But this isn't about them. This is about you, it's about your legacy. In the medieval mindset, a king's greatness is measured by his conquests. A peaceful king is often seen as a weak king. A warrior king, one who expands his domain and wins glory on the battlefield, is the ideal. He is the one the chroniclers will write about, the one the bards will sing of. So you convince yourself, and you try to convince your court, that this war is not an act of aggression, but a righteous quest to claim what is rightfully yours. You summon your great council. You lay out your claim, perhaps with a long, confusing genealogical chart prepared by a helpful monk. You speak of honor, of duty, of the glory God will surely grant your just cause. The older, wiser lords in the room know this is a foolish endeavor. They know it will cost a fortune in blood and treasure. But to speak out against it is to risk being labeled a coward or, even worse, a traitor. The younger, more hot-headed knights raised on tales of chivalry and heroic deed are excited. For them, war is a chance to win fame, fortune, and land. They cheer your decision. And so it is settled. The war is on. The preparations begin. Your sheriffs and drees go out with the commission of array, a royal order to conscript soldiers. This isn't a call for professional volunteers, it's a forced draft. They go into villages and pick out the fittest-looking young men. These are not soldiers. They are farmers, blacksmiths, and weavers who are handed a simple spear or a longbow and told they are now in the king's army. Their families are left to manage the harvest without them. Many of them will never return. And here's a little-known aspect of medieval recruitment. It was often a way for villagers to get rid of their troublemakers. When the commissioners of array came to town, the village elders would often point them towards the local drunks, the petty thieves, and the generally disliked. It was a convenient way to clean house. The cost is astronomical. You drain your treasury paying for supplies, weapons, and horses. You take out huge loans from Italian bankers, pledging future tax revenues as collateral. You melt down the queen's silverware. The entire economic life of the kingdom is bent towards this singular, vainglorious goal. The 100 Years' War between England and France is the ultimate example of this. It was a sprawling, century-long conflict sparked by the English king's claim to the French throne. It wasn't a constant war, but a series of brutal campaigns, punctuated by periods of uneasy truce. It caused immense suffering on both sides, devastated the French countryside, and nearly bankrupted the English crown on multiple occasions. Meant very little to the average person. Historians still debate the true motivations behind these wars of prestige. Was it really all about a king's personal quest for glory, a product of a vulgar culture that glorified violence, or were there more pragmatic, hidden motives? Some argue that war was a useful tool for a king to keep his restless, aggressive nobility busy. It was better to have them fighting a foreign enemy than fighting each other, or worse, plotting against the king back home. A foreign war could be a massive, state-sanctioned destruction. Another argument is that war, despite its costs, was one of the few ways the state could actually expand its power. Raising a wartime army, levying national taxes, and organizing logistics all required a level of central organization that didn't exist in peacetime. War, in a sense, helped build the modern state. It was a brutal but effective catalyst for governmental growth. But down on the ground, these grand strategic theories mean nothing. You are now at the head of your army. You are marching through your own lands towards the coast, and your army is already a plague upon the landscape. The concept of a modern supply chain is non-existent. Your troops live off the land, which is a polite way and was technically the king's right to requisition supplies. But it often devolved into outright looting and violence by undisciplined soldiers. Your glorious campaign begins by terrorizing your own people. You stand on the deck of a ship, looking back at the shores of your kingdom. You are filled with a sense of purpose, of destiny. You are a warrior king, embarking on a great adventure. But your quest for personal glory is already built on a foundation of coercion, debt, and the suffering of the very people you are supposed to protect. The war has just begun, and it is already a monument to your own ego. The sea crossing was miserable, a rolling, stomach-churning affair in a cramped and smelly cog ship. But you've made it. Your army has landed on foreign soil. The quest for glory is truly underway. Now you get to experience what a medieval battle is actually like. And it is nothing like the heroic paintings or the chivalrous poems. It is a terrifying, confusing, and thoroughly miserable experience, especially if you're not the one sitting on a magnificent warhorse. Let's take you off your royal mount for a moment. You are no longer the king surveying the field from a safe distance. You are one of those peasant conscripts, let's call you Tom. You were pulled from your village, handed a cheaply made spear and a padded jacket called a gambison. And now you're standing in a field somewhere in France. It's been raining for 3 days. The ground has the consistency of a thick, cold stew. Every step is a struggle against the mud, which seems determined to pull your leather boots right off your feet. Your uniform is soaked through, and the woolen padding of your gambison feel like a heavy, sodden blanket. You're cold, you're hungry, and you're terrified. The food rations ran out yesterday, and all you've had to eat is a piece of hard, stale bread you've been saving. The water in your water skin tastes of leather and slime. You have no idea where you are. You don't speak the local language. All you know is that somewhere on the other side of this field is an army of men who want to kill you. The noise is the first thing that hits you. It's not the clean, crisp sound of trumpets from the movies. It's a chaotic din. The shouting of sergeants trying to get their men into line, the nervous whinnying of horses, the clatter of thousands of metal objects bumping against each other, and a low, constant hum of thousands of nervous men muttering prayers or trying to tell jokes that no one finds funny. Then you see them. The enemy army, forming up on the far ridge. They look like a forest of steel points and fluttering pennons. And then, the knights. You see the enemy lords on their huge war horses, covered in plate armor that gleams even in the dull grey light. They look like giants, like mythical creatures. You have a spear. They have a spear. They have a spear. They have a spear. The armor that your spear point will likely just skate off. You feel a profound and visceral sense of your own vulnerability. The battle begins, and it doesn't begin with a heroic charge. It might begin with a shower of arrows. If you're an English archer with a longbow, you are a medieval machine gun. You can loose 10, maybe 12 arrows a minute. You don't even aim at a specific person. You just fire into the sky, aiming for an area, creating a lethal arrow storm that rains down on the enemy lines. The sound of thousands of arrowing, high-pitched hiss, followed by the wet thuds of them hitting bodies and the screams of the men they hit. If you're on the receiving end, it's a nightmare. You huddle behind a flimsy wooden shield, listening to the arrows thumping into the ground around you, praying one doesn't find a gap in your armor or more likely your face. Then comes the charge. The ground begins to tremble. You hear a sound like thunder. It's the enemy knights, hundreds of them, charging across the muddy field. A full-on heavy cavalry charge is one of the most terrifying things imaginable. It's a ton of horse and armored men, moving at speed, all focused on a single point, your fragile line of infantry. Your job as a spearman is to stand your ground, plant the butt of your spear in the mud, and present a wall of sharp points. You will be ridden down and slaughtered. If you stand, you might still die, but at least you have a chance of stopping the charge. Here's a small gruesome detail of the reality of this clash sanitation on the battlefield. In the stress and terror of combat, many men would lose control of their bowels. The field of battle would be not only muddy and bloody, but also fouled with human waste, adding another layer of grimness to the whole experience. The clash, when it comes, is not a series of elegant, one-on-one duels. It is a melee, a shoving, hacking, stabbing scrum of men. You are packed so tightly you can barely swing your weapon. You can smell the sweat, fear, and blood of the man next to you. You jab your spear forward, not at a specific target, but just into the mass of bodies in front of you. You don't know if you hit anyone. An axe swings over your head. A man next to you grunts and falls, a dagger in his neck. You step over his body to close the gap in the line. The debate among military historians about the nature of the medieval melee is intense. Did armies maintain their cohesion, fighting in organized units, or did battles quickly degenerate into a chaotic fray? For all of individual combats, the answer is likely somewhere in between. Commanders would try to maintain formations, but the sheer press of bodies, the noise, and the terror meant that small units would often lose contact with each other, and the fight would become a swirling, confusing mess. Victory in this kind of battle often comes down to which side breaks first. It's a contest of nerve. If one part of the line wavers, panics, and runs, a gap opens up. The enemy pours through and the line collapses. The battle turns into a rout. And the most dangerous part of a medieval battle was not the fighting itself, but the rout. This is when the most killing happened. A fleeing, panicked man is easy prey for a knight on horseback. The victors would ride down the vanquished, killing them from behind with impunity. You, Tom the conscript, have survived. Your side won. The enemy broke and ran. You are still standing, covered in mud and someone else's blood, your ears ringing, your body shaking from adrenaline. You are not filled with a sense of glory. You are just numb, exhausted, and profoundly, deeply grateful to still be alive. You look around at the field, now littered with the dead and dying, and you feel nothing of the grand purpose the king spoke of. You just want to go home, but the war is far from over. The battle is over. Your side was victorious. The enemy has fled and the field is yours. From your vantage point as king, you feel a surge of triumph. The bards will sing of this day, the chroniclers will write of your brilliant leadership, but for the men on the ground, the victory brings not celebration, but a new and gruesome set of tasks. And for the defeated, it is the beginning of a fresh hell. The first thing that happens after the fighting stops is the looting. This isn't a chaotic free-for-all, at least not at first. It's an organized, top-down process. You, the king, and your high-ranking nobles have the first claim. You get the most valuable prize of all the captured enemy nobles. A captured duke or a listened enemy to be executed, a winning lottery ticket. You will hold him for ransom. The amount can be staggering, enough to fund your war for another year. The entire system of chivalry, which dictated that knights should fight honorably and take each other prisoner rather than kill, was built on this cold, hard economic reality. Your men will go through the battlefield, identifying the richly armored bodies. They are looking for heraldry, the coats of arms that identify a man's lineage. A minor knight is worth a decent sum. A banneret, a knight important enough to lead his own men, is worth more. A great lord is a jackpot. They are carefully taken into custody, treated with courtesy and respect befitting their station, because a live, healthy prisoner is a valuable asset. After the nobles are secured, the looting is opened up to the common soldiers. For men like Tom, our peasant conscript, this is their payday. This is the main reason they were willing to risk their lives. They swarm over the battlefield, a grim tide of scavengers. They strip the bodies of the dead friend and foe, alike of anything of value. A sword, a dagger, a good leather belt, a pair of boots. Even the clothes are taken. The dead are left naked on the field. And here's a particularly brutal part of the process: the mercy. As your men move among the groaning, wounded enemy soldiers, they are not there to offer aid. They are there to finish them off. A wounded common soldier is a liability. He can't be ransomed, and you certainly don't have the resources or inclination to nurse him back to health. So, a quick dagger thrust ends his suffering. This was often done with a specific type of dagger called a miser. I called the name, literally meaning mercy. It was a thin, pointed blade designed to slit through the gaps in armor, delivering a quick if brutal end. It was the grim economics of the battlefield in action. While the battlefield is being cleaned, your army moves on to the next prize by town or city that supported the enemy. If the city surrenders immediately, you might be merciful. You'll demand a huge payment of tribute to spare them, but if they put up a fight, if they force you to lay siege to their walls and you take the city by storm, all bets are off. By the rules of war at the time, a city that resisted and was taken by force was considered to have forfeited its right to any protection. Your soldiers who have been fighting and dying for weeks are let loose. For a day or two, the city is theirs. This is the sack of a city, and it is one of the most horrific events in medieval warfare. Your soldiers, drunk on victory and cheap wine, rampage through the streets. They break into homes, taking anything of value. They smash what they cannot carry. The violence is indiscriminate. Citizens who resist are cut down. Churches are plundered, their golden chalices and silver candlesticks stuffed into sacks. The veneer of discipline and chivalry dissolves completely, replaced by greed and brutality. This practice of sacking a city wasn't just random violence, it served a strategic purpose. It was a terror tactic. By making an example of one city, You sent a powerful message to all the others in the region: resist me, and this will be your fate. Surrender, and you will be spared. It was a brutally effective way to break the will of an entire province. The historical debate here centers on how much control a king or commander actually had during a sack. Were they actively ordering it as a policy of terror, or was it an unavoidable consequence of a victory, a perk that the common soldiers expected and that a commander was powerless to stop without causing a mutiny? Some commanders, like Henry V of England, were known to be strict disciplinarians and would hang soldiers for looting without permission. But even he wasn't always able to control his men after a hard-fought victory. The promise of plunder was a key motivator for an army that was often poorly and irregularly paid. You, as the victorious king, might set up your headquarters in the city's captured castle, insulated from the worst of the chaos in the streets below. You're busy counting your profits, the ransom money, the tribute, the choicest treasures from the city's cathedral. You might tell yourself that the sack is an unfortunate but necessary part of war. You might even feel a flicker of distaste at the reports of your soldiers' behavior. But you don't stop it. This is the price of victory. This is the reward for your army. The city burns, and its people suffer, so that your glory can be magnified and your campaign can continue. Your triumph is written in the language of fire, theft, and tears. Your victory is complete. The city has been sacked, and your coffers are temporarily full. You've rewarded your loyal vassals with plunder and promises of land. But your feudal army, the one made up of lords who owe you service and peasants who were conscripted, is already starting to dissolve. The 40 days of obligatory service are up for many of the knights. The peasants, who never wanted to be here in the first place, are deserting in droves, trying to make the long trek home in time for the harvest. An army held together by feudal obligation is a fickle instrument. If you want to continue your war, to hold the territory you've just conquered, you need soldiers whose loyalty isn't tied to a social contract or a 40-day time limit. You need professionals. You need men who fight not for honor or for land, but for cold, hard cash. It's time to hire mercenaries. And so you send out your paymasters to the great crossroads of Europe, to Flanders, to Italy, places where war is a business and soldiers are a commodity. You are now entering the grubby, treacherous, but highly effective world of contract warfare. The men who answer your call are a different breed from your chivalrous knights. They are free companies or routiers, bands of soldiers united under a charismatic and ruthless captain. This captain is an entrepreneur of violence. He negotiates a contract with you, specifying the number of men, their equipment, so many spearmen, so many crossbowmen, the length of service, and most importantly, the price. These are not patriots. They have no loyalty to your crown or your dynastic claim. Their only loyalty is to their captain and to the money you promise them. They are often the hardened survivors of a dozen other wars, men who are skilled, disciplined, and utterly bereft of any moral compass. They are the best soldiers money can buy, and also the most dangerous. When they are on your payroll, they are magnificent. In battle, they don't break. They hold the line. They have a professional pride in their work. The Swiss pikemen, for instance, were famous for their impenetrable hedgehog formations, a terrifying wall of steel that could stop even the most determined cavalry charge. Genoa's crossbowmen were renowned for their skill and their powerful weapons, capable of punching through knightly armor at a distance. Hiring them gives you a decisive edge on the battlefield. But the moment the money runs out, or is even a day late, they become a massive problem. A feudal knight might grumble. If he isn't paid, a mercenary captain might switch sides. They have been known to desert on the eve of a battle, because your rival offered them a better price. Their loyalty is entirely transactional. You are not their king, you are their current employer. And here's the real cruelty of the mercenary system. What happens when the war is over, or pauses for a truce? You can't afford to keep thousands of professional soldiers on your payroll during peacetime. So you terminate their contracts. You disband them. But where do they go? They are men whose only skill is violence. They have no homes to return to. They don't just disappear. They become a plague on the landscape. These free companies, now unemployed, will roam the countryside, living by extortion. They will seize a small castle or a fortified town and use it as a base to terrorize the surrounding region. They will demand protection money from villagers, threatening to burn their crops and slaughter their livestock if they don't pay. They effectively become a syndicated crime organization, and the local peasants are the ones who suffer. The very soldiers you hired to win your war are now pillaging your new territories, or even your own kingdom. One of the most bizarre and chilling examples of this was the Great Company in 14th century Italy. It was a massive mercenary army, tens of thousands strong, under commanders like the English knight Sir John Hawkwood. When they weren't employed by one of the warring city-states like Florence or Milan, they would march through the country, sacking towns and holding entire regions to ransom. They were a state unto themselves, a mobile engine of destruction for hire. The academic debate here is about the long-term impact of the mercenary system. Did it, as some argue, professionalize warfare and lead to more disciplined and effective armies, ultimately strengthening the power of the kings who could afford them? This line of thinking suggests that mercenaries were a key part of the transition from feudalism to the modern state, as kings with cash could field armies superior to those of their unruly nobles. Or, as others contend, was it a deeply corrosive force? Did it make war more frequent and more brutal? By creating a permanent class of men whose livelihood depended on conflict, did it drain treasuries, destabilize regions, and inflict untold misery on the civilian population who were caught between the wars and the unemployed soldiers afterward? The truth is that it was likely both. Mercenaries helped you win wars, but the system itself created a perpetual cycle of violence. As king, you are now tied to this system. You need your generous crossbowmen. You need your Flemish spearmen, but you also live in constant fear of them. You have to bleed your kingdom dry with taxes to ensure their wages are paid on time. You have to watch them carefully, knowing their captain is probably receiving letters from your enemies. You've hired a pack of wolves to guard your sheep, and you have to constantly feed them, knowing that the moment you stop, they will turn and devour you. Your quest for power has made you dependent on men who have no concept of loyalty, only a keen understanding of profit and violence. The war drags on, funded by debased coins and fought by unreliable mercenaries. You've returned to your main castle for the winter, a fortress that is supposed to be your sanctuary, but the paranoia you cultivated in your kingdom has a way of seeping back through the walls. The threats are no longer just on the battlefield or in the council chamber. They are now on your dinner plate. In a world of shifting allegiances and secret plots, every meal could be your last. Let's sit down to a royal banquet. The great hall is filled with the warmth and light of a roaring fire and dozens of torches. The tables are laden with an extravagant display of wealth and power: peacocks, roasted and dray-feathered to look alive, intricate sugar sculptures called subtleties, wine flowing from silver ewers. The scene is one of opulent confidence, but it's a facade. Beneath the surface, a quiet, deadly ritual of fear. Before a single morsel of food touches your lips, a procession of servants approaches your table. This is the assay, the formal tasting of your food to check for poison. It's not a quick, sneaky taste in the kitchen. It's a public ceremony. A high-ranking servant, perhaps the steward of the household, takes a piece of your bread. He rubs it on the roasted swan you're about to be served. Then, he eats the bread in front of you and everyone else present. He does the same for the wine, pouring a little into a special cup and drinking it. Then, everyone waits. They watch him for any sign of sickness: a choking fit, a sudden sweat, a painful convulsion. Only after a suitable amount of time has passed and the taster is clearly still alive are you permitted to eat. This ritual applied to everything. Your salt had to be tested. Even the water you used for washing your hands was assayed. This wasn't just for the king either. High-ranking nobles and bishops also employed tasters. The fear of poison was an ambient, ever-present reality of high status life, and for good reason. Poison was the perfect weapon for a medieval assassination. It was quiet, it was subtle, and it could often be mistaken for a sudden, natural illness in an age of primitive medicine. A sudden, violent stomach cramp and fever could be a divinely sent sickness, or it could be a sun slipped into your wine. It was impossible to be sure, which made the fear all the more potent. Here's a specific and rather clever bit of anti-poison, the use of a serpent's stung, which was actually a fossilized shark's tooth. These were often mounted in elaborate coral or silver stones called adder's stones and placed on the table. It was believed that the tongue would sweat or change color in the presence of poison. Another prized possession was a piece of a narwhal's tusk, which was believed to be the horn of a unicorn. A unicorn horn was considered the ultimate poison detector and antidote. A king might have a cup carved from it, or at least a piece of it to dip into his drinks. Of course, none of this actually worked, but these talismans provided a psychological comfort, a belief that magic could combat the unseen threat. So you have your official taster, your pregustat, or but who is this person? It has to be someone you trust implicitly. But in your world, who do you truly trust? This creates a paradox. The taster has to be close to you, but anyone close to you is also in a position to betray you. So the role of taster was often given to someone whose life was inextricably tied to yours, someone who would have nothing to gain and everything to lose from your death. Perhaps it's the son of a loyal lord, raised in your household. His own father's life would be forfeit if he failed in his duty. The historical debate around poisoning is a tricky one. How common was it really? Chroniclers and storytellers love to write about poison plots. They are dramatic and sinister. The suspicion of poison hangs over the deaths of many historical figures, from popes to princes. But proving it is another matter entirely. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning: vomiting, stomach pain, diarrhea, almost identical to the symptoms of dysentery or cholera, which were rampant and killed far more people than assassins ever did. Some historians argue that the fear of poison was far greater than the actual reality. They suggest that it was a convenient explanation for any sudden, unexpected death of a powerful person. It was easier for people to believe a beloved king was murdered by treacherous enemies than to accept that he could be struck down by the same random, undignified sickness that could kill a common peasant. Accusations of poisoning were also a great political weapon to smear an enemy. Other historians argue that we underestimate its use. They point to the sheer volume of anecdotal evidence and the elaborate precautions taken by the powerful as proof that it was a real and persistent threat. The formulas for various poisons were recorded in texts. The ingredients, like arsenic, known as inheritance powder, were known, if not widely available. You sit at your feast, finally able to eat, but the pleasure is diminished. Every bite is taken with a sliver of doubt. The ritual of the assay, designed to make you feel safe, has the opposite effect. It's a constant, public reminder that you are surrounded by people who might want you dead. It reinforces your isolation. You cannot even perform the basic human act of eating without a shield of another person's body. The threat is no longer an army on a distant hill, it's an invisible powder in a friendly cup. Your paranoia has followed you home and taken a seat at your table, and the person you have to fear most might not be a rival duke or foreign king, but someone standing right behind your chair. The fear of a poison cup is a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. But there is a deeper, more painful source of paranoia that eats away at you, a threat far more intimate than any hired assassin. You've neutralized your uncles and cousins, you've cowed the ambitious dukes, but the most dangerous threats often come from the people you are supposed to love and trust the most, your own immediate family. The royal court is not a home, it's a crucible where familial bonds are melted down and forged into weapons. Let's start with your own children. You look at your eldest son, the heir to the throne. You should be filled with pride and hope. He is the future of your dynasty, the vessel into which the body politic will one day pour. But you also see a rival. As he grows older, he starts to develop his own ambitions, his own followers. The younger, more impatient knights at court begin to flock to him. They see him as the future, and they are eager to advance their own careers by attaching themselves to the rising sun. He becomes a magnet for the discontented. Any lord who feels slighted by you might start to quietly cultivate a friendship with the prince. You begin to see his ambition, or what you perceive as his ambition, everywhere. When he asks for his own lands and titles to rule, is it a reasonable request for a prince coming of age, or is he trying to build his own power base to challenge you when he wins a tournament and the crowd roars his name? Do you feel fatherly pride, or a pang of jealous fear? He is the living embodiment of your own mortality. His strength is a reminder of your own advancing age. This father-son dynamic is a recurring tragedy in royal history. The sons of King Henry I of England, Henry the young king, Richard the Lionheart, and the future King John were constantly rebelling against him, often in alliance with their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and the King of France. Henry I spent a huge portion of his reign fighting his own children. He was a powerful and brilliant king, but he was worn down by the endless, heartbreaking betrayals of his own family. So you face a choice. You can give your son power and responsibility, hoping to earn his loyalty and prepare him for rule. But this is risky. It gives him the tools to potentially overthrow you. Or you can keep him powerless, keep him at court under your thumb, denying him any real authority. But this will only breed resentment and frustration, making him more likely to rebel. It is a political and emotional catch-22. The threat isn't just from your sons. It's from your brothers. A king's brother is in a uniquely difficult position. He shares the royal blood but not the crown. He is close to power but does not hold it. This makes him a natural figurehead for any conspiracy. The history of the Wars of the Roses in England is a tangled, bloody saga of cousins and brothers vying for the throne. The House of York and the House of Lancaster were both descended from King Edward III, and their proximity to the crown fueled 3 decades of brutal civil war. And here's a strange, sad little detail about these family dynamics: the role of foster age. In some medieval societies, particularly in places like Ireland and Scotland, it was common for a lord or king to send his young son to be raised in the household of another powerful family. The goal was to build alliances. The fostered child would grow up with strong bonds to his foster family, creating a web of personal loyalties. But it also meant that a father and son might barely know each other. Their relationship would be primarily political, not personal, making it even easier for suspicion and rivalry to take root. The historical debate here revolves around intent. When a prince rebelled against his father, was it usually a genuine attempt to seize the throne, or was it more of a political negotiation, a way for the prince to pressure his father into giving him more power, land, or revenue? Some historians argue that many of these rebellions were not serious coups. The prince didn't want his father dead, he just wanted his share of the pie. Now he was acting like a frustrated CEO in waiting, trying to force the old chairman into giving him more responsibility. Others take a more cynical view. They argue that behind the chivalrous language of rights and inheritance, these were deadly serious power struggles. A prince who challenged his father knew he was playing the ultimate game. If he won, he became king. If he lost, he could face imprisonment or death. The pleasantries masked a brutal reality, so use it in your council chamber, discussing matters of state. Your son is there, handsome and popular. Your brother is there, a respected military commander. They smile and offer you their counsel. But you can't silence the voice in your head. You find yourself analyzing their every word, every glance. Does my son's advice serve the kingdom, or does it serve his own ambition? When my brother agrees with me, is it genuine, or is he just biding his time? The web of paranoia that you so carefully spun to control your kingdom has now, inevitably, wrapped itself around your own heart. You have built a world where loyalty is a commodity and power is the only goal. You cannot now expect your own family to be immune to the values of the very system you have perfected. The cruel logic of your rule dictates that your greatest enemies are not in a foreign land, but in your own blood. The crown has not only isolated you from your subjects, it has isolated you from your own kin. You are surrounded by ambitious sons and resentful brothers. The men in your family are a constant, visible threat. But there is another power player in this dangerous game, one who operates in a different, more subtle sphere: your wife, the queen. She is the quiet center of the court's intricate web of influence, and her position is one of profound contradiction. She is both a pawn and a player, a symbol of peace and a potential catalyst for war. On the surface, the queen's role seems straightforward. Her primary job is to produce a male heir. A healthy son secures the succession and strengthens your dynasty. A second son is a bonus, a backup. A daughter can be useful, a strategic asset to be married off to a foreign king or a powerful duke to forge an alliance. Her entire value, in the cold calculus of statecraft, is tied to her fertility. An infertile queen is a political crisis. A queen who only produces daughters is a disappointment. This is a brutal, dehumanizing pressure. She is also meant to be a model of piety and domesticity. She manages the royal household, a massive and complex enterprise. She is expected to be a patron of the arts and the church, softening your harsh, warlike image with a touch of grace and charity. She is the soft power of your regime. But a queen is rarely just a meek and passive figure. She is often a foreign princess brought to your court as part of a peace treaty or an alliance. This means she is not just your wife, she is an ambassador for her home country. She arrives with her own retinue of servants, advisors, and priests from her own land. She maintains a constant correspondence with her father or brother, the king of her homeland. This makes her position incredibly precarious. If you go to war with her country of origin, where do her loyalties lie? Is she loyal to you, her husband and king, or to her brother and her father, the family she grew up with? She is trapped in the middle, an object of suspicion for both sides. Your counselors will whisper that she is a spy, passing secrets to her family. Her own family might pressure her to influence you, to push for policies that benefit them. A strong, intelligent queen learns to navigate this treacherous landscape. She builds her own network of allies within the court. She uses her patronage to win the loyalty of certain nobles or bishops. She can become a powerful advisor to you, offering a different perspective, one informed by her foreign upbringing. Eleanor of Aquitaine, wife to two kings Louis VI of France and Henry I of England, and mother to two more, Richard the Lionheart and John, was one of the most formidable political players of the entire Middle Ages. She was not a quiet, domestic figure. She was a major landowner in her own right, a crusader, and at times, a rebel who actively plotted against her own husband. And here's a quirky little detail about a queen's power: the concept of queen's gold. This was a surcharge, often 1/10 of a voluntary fine paid to the king, that the queen was entitled to claim. It was an independent source of income for her, completely separate from the king's treasury. It gave her a degree of financial autonomy that was rare for women at the time. A clever queen could use this money to build her own political network, dispensing patronage and winning friends without having to ask your permission. But a queen's power is always derivative of yours, and her fall from grace can be swift and brutal. If you grow tired of her, or if she fails to produce a male heir, you need to marry someone else. You can't just get a divorce in the modern sense. You need an annulment. You have to petition the Pope, claiming that the marriage was invalid from the beginning. The most common reason given was consanguinity, that you and your wife were too closely related, according to the Church's complex and labyrinthine rules. This often involved finding a shared great-great-great-grandparent, a pretext to dissolve a politically inconvenient union. For the Queen, this is a public humiliation. She is cast aside, her children are often declared illegitimate, and she is stripped of her status. Her life's work is undone in a moment. King Philip I of France did this to his second wife, Ingeborg of Denmark, casting her aside the day after their wedding, apparently because he simply took a dislike to her. He then spent the next 2 decades fighting the Pope, who refused to grant the annulment, all while Ingeborg remained a prisoner. The historical debate about medieval queens often revolves around the nature of their power. Were they truly influential political actors wielding real power from behind the scenes, or were they, with a few famous exceptions, largely figureheads, their influence entirely dependent on the goodwill of their husbands and the political climate of the moment? Some historians, often using a feminist lens, have worked to uncover the hidden influence of queens, reading between the lines of chronicles written by men. They look at charters the queens signed, the religious houses they founded, the political appointments they influenced, and argue for a much more active and powerful role than has been traditionally acknowledged. Others maintain a more skeptical view, arguing that while some queens were certainly exceptional, the system was designed to keep them subordinate. Their power was soft and it could evaporate in an instant. As king, your relationship with your wife is the most complex of all. She is your partner, your confidant, the mother of your children. But she is also a political asset, a potential spy, a rival for the affections and loyalties of your subjects, and a constant reminder of your treaty obligations to her family. You might love her, you might resent her, you might resent her, you might resent her, you might resent time. In the brutal game of the throne, even the intimacy of the marriage bed is a political arena. You have built a system of power based on fear, calculation, and ruthless pragmatism. You've sidelined your family, terrorized your nobles, and squeezed your people. You've done all this while draped in the mantle of the divine right of kings, the idea that you are God's chosen representative on earth. But what happens when you, the supposedly holy and consecrated king, commit an act so profoundly immoral, so contrary to the Christian virtues you are sworn to uphold, that it creates a jarring contradiction? What happens when the sacred body politic is forced to house a truly sinful soul? This is where the psychological stress of your position becomes almost unbearable. You are trapped between two identities, the semi-divine king and the flawed, sinful man. And sometimes the man's desires, his rage, his lust, his greed overwhelm the king's holy office. Let's imagine a scenario. You have taken a city that defied you. In a fit of pique, a moment of uncontrolled fury at their insolence, you order a massacre. Not just the strategic sack of the city, but the indiscriminate slaughter of its inhabitants. Men, women, children. You give the order, and your soldiers, hardened by war, carry it out. In the immediate aftermath, you might feel a grim satisfaction. You have made your point in the most brutal way imaginable. You have demonstrated the terrible consequences of defying you. But then, the reports start to trickle back to the wider world. The story spreads. And the church, the institution that anointed you and gave you your sacred legitimacy, cannot ignore it. A powerful bishop, perhaps a man of genuine piety or one who sees a political opportunity, publicly condemns your actions. He calls you a butcher, a tyrant, a man who has offended God. He might threaten you with excommunication. Suddenly, your greatest political tool, your divine right, is being turned against you. The very people who are supposed to confirm your sacred status are now denouncing you as a sinner. This creates a crisis, not just a literal crisis, but a spiritual one. You are forced to confront the man in the mirror. You are God's chosen, but you have committed a grievous sin. How do you reconcile these two conflicting realities? One path is defiance. You can double down. You declare that the bishop is the one who is out of line. You accuse him of treason. You assert that your actions as king, however harsh, are necessary for the security of the realm and are therefore, by definition, God's will. You are the king who is a mere bishop to question your judgment. This is the path of pure, unadulterated tyranny, where you place your own will even above the moral laws of the church. The other path is penance. This is a fascinating and highly theatrical process. It allows you to acknowledge your sin without diminishing your royal authority. The most famous example of this is the penance of Emperor Theodosius in the year 390. After ordering a brutal massacre of civilians in Thessaloniki, he was barred from entering the cathedral imam by the formidable Saint Ambrose. To be readmitted to the church and the good graces of God, Theodosius, the most powerful man in the Roman world, had to publicly strip off his royal robes, lie prostrate on the church floor, and beg for forgiveness. This was an incredible piece of political theater. On one hand, it showed the power of the church, that even an emperor was subject to God's moral law, but on the other hand, it was a masterful move by Theodosius. By publicly submitting to God, he cleansed his sin and was re-accepted as a righteous Christian ruler. His authority was not diminished, it was actually reinforced. He had shown that he was a good, pious man who had erred but was now forgiven. He had washed the blood from his hands, at least symbolically. A small, quirky detail of medieval penance was the use of a penitential, a kind of catalogue of sins with corresponding acts of penance. A priest might consult one of these books to determine your punishment. For a king, the penance could be grand, founding a new monastery, funding a crusade, or undertaking a pilgrimage to a major shrine. But they were also grand public works that enhanced your prestige and legacy. You could atone for your sin and get a great PR boost at the same time. The historical debate here is about sincerity. When a king like Henry I of England performed public penance for his role in the murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket, walking barefoot to Canterbury Cathedral and allowing monks to whip him, was he genuinely racked with guilt and fear for his immortal soul, or was he a master politician, performing a calculated act of public humility to quell a massive political and religious backlash? Some historians argue for genuine piety. These were men of their time, who, despite their brutal actions, deeply believed in heaven, hell, and the power of God's judgment. The fear of eternal damnation was a very real and motivating force. They believed they had sinned, and they were terrified of the consequences. Other historians take a more cynical view. They see these public displays of penance as pure realpolitik. The king had miscalculated, his cruelty had provoked a crisis, and this was the most effective way to manage the fallout. It was a performance for an audience of bishops, nobles, and the public. By playing the part of the repentant sinner, the king could regain control of the narrative and put the crisis behind him. The truth is likely a complex mixture of both. You, the king, probably feel a confusing cocktail of emotions. Genuine remorse for the massacre, fear of divine punishment, and a cold, pragmatic understanding of what you need to do to fix the political damage. So you perform the penance. You wear the rough sackcloth. You allow yourself to be publicly humbled. You play your part. And as you walk away, your sin forgiven, you have learned a valuable lesson. It's that your cruelty must be carefully managed. It must always be justifiable, packaged in the language of justice and necessity. Uncontrolled, passionate cruelty is a political liability. Calculated, dispassionate cruelty is the art of kingship. You've learned to balance your cruelty with calculated penance. You walk the tightrope between being a feared tyrant and a respected Christian king. But this constant pressure, the paranoia, the fear of betrayal, the spiritual schizophrenia of the kings to bodies takes a toll. The human mind is not designed for this kind of sustained, isolated stress. What happens when the body natural of the king, the mortal man, simply breaks? What happens when madness wears the crown? A king's madness is not a private, personal tragedy. It is a national catastrophe. The entire kingdom, which is built around the principle of a single, rational will at its center, is thrown into chaos when that will becomes erratic, delusional, or simply vacant. Let's look at one of the most famous and tragic cases, King Charles VI of France, known as both the beloved and the mad. For the first part of his reign, he was a perfectly capable, popular ruler. But then, something snapped. Picture the scene. It's a hot summer's day in 1392. The king is leading his army on a campaign. As they ride through a forest, a disheveled man, a leper, rushes out from the trees, grabs the king's bridle and screams, "Ride no further, noble king. You are betrayed." The man is pushed away, but his words seem to plant a seed of terror in the king's mind. A short while later, a page, drowsy from the heat, accidentally drops a lance, which clatters against a steel helmet. Sudden noise acts like a trigger. The king, believing he is under attack, draws his sword. His eyes are wild. He screams forward against the traitors. "They wish to deliver me to the enemy." He is not seeing his friends and loyal knights, he is seeing assassins. He charges at his own men, swinging his sword wildly. He kills several knights, including a man he loved and trusted, before he can be subdued, exhausted and in a coma. He recovered from this first fit, but it was the beginning of a long nightmarish descent. For the rest of his life, Charles VI would be plagued by bouts of severe mental illness. His madness took bizarre and tragic forms. For months at a time, he would not recognize his own wife or children. He would run wildly through the corridors of his palace, howling like a wolf. He refused to bathe or change his clothes for long periods. And here's one of the most peculiar and famous of his delusions, the glass delusion. For a period, King Charles became convinced that he was made of glass. He refused to let people touch him, for fear he would shatter. He had special iron rods sewn into his clothing to protect his fragile body. This wasn't unique to him. The glass delusion was a surprisingly common affliction reported among the wealthy in late medieval and early modern Europe. It seems to have been a very specific manifestation of anxiety and fragility. When the king is mad, a power vacuum is created. The government doesn't stop, but it becomes rudderless. Who is in charge? The queen, the king's ambitious brother, his powerful uncles. The dukes of Burgundy and Berry. The court dissolves into factions, each claiming to be ruling on behalf of the afflicted king, but in reality, each is vying for their own power and wealth. The kingdom bleeds. The civil war between the Armagnac supporters of the king's brother, the Duke of Orleans, and the Burgundians tore France apart. It was a brutal, vicious conflict, all happening while the English under King Henry V saw an opportunity and invaded, leading to the disastrous defeat at Agincourt. The king's madness directly enabled the conquest of his kingdom. The historical debate around mad kings like Charles V is twofold. First, what was the actual medical diagnosis? Modern historians and physicians have retrospectively diagnosed him with everything from schizophrenia to bipolar disorder to porphyria, a genetic disease that afflicted King George I of England centuries later. The truth is, we can never be sure. The medieval chroniclers described the symptoms, but they lacked the medical framework to understand the cause. They often saw it as a form of divine punishment or demonic possession. The second debate is about the political consequences. How does a system built on personal monarchy cope with the absence of a person? The French developed a legal theory that the king's will could be exercised by his council, even if he was incapacitated. But this was just a theory. In practice, it meant that whichever faction controlled the council controlled the kingdom. The king's body, still sacred, became a rubber stamp, or silent, sometimes screaming, prop to be manipulated by whichever group had the upper hand. As a member of Charles's court, your life becomes a nightmare of uncertainty. The king might be lucid today, signing documents and recognizing you. Tomorrow he might be hiding under a table, believing he is a dog. The policies of the kingdom can change from one week to the next depending on which faction has the king's ear or physical possession of his body. Loyalty becomes impossible. You might swear an oath to the Duke of Orleans today, only to find the Duke of Burgundy in power tomorrow, and your oath now marks you as a traitor. The sight of the mad king is a terrifying and pitiful one. He is the living symbol of the kingdom's sickness. The man who was anointed by God, whose body was supposed to be the immortal vessel of the state, is now a fragile, broken human being, lost in his own private terrors. His personal tragedy dissolves the entire polity of the monarchy. If the king, God's chosen, can be so afflicted, what does that say about the divine order of things? His madness is more than a political problem, it's a theological crisis, revealing the terrifying fragility of the entire system you've built. The king is mad. The court is a nest of vipers fighting over the scraps of his authority. The war with your rival continues, a festering worm that drains the kingdom's resources. And who pays the price for all of this high-level dysfunction? The same people who always pay the common folk. But even the most downtrodden, oppressed people have a breaking point. Your tyranny, compounded by the chaos of a fractured government, is about to push them over the edge. Let's go back to the village, the place of mud and toil where our story began. The situation here has gone from bad to worse. The taxes have become even more predatory as rival factions try to raise funds for their private armies. Your constant wars have not only conscripted their sons but have also led to raids by enemy soldiers and, even worse, by unemployed mercenary companies, the ones you hired and then disbanded. These free companies are now the local terror, stealing what little the tax collectors have left. On top of this, a new plague might have swept through, or a series of bad harvests has left the granaries empty. The peasants are not just poor, they are starving. And they are angry. They listen to traveling, radical priests, men like John Ball in England, who preach a dangerous and revolutionary idea that in the eyes of God, when Adam delved in Eve's span, the famous couplet went, who was then the gentleman? This question strikes at the very heart of the feudal order. It suggests that the nobility, and by extension you, the king, are a man-made imposition, not a divine necessity. The spark that ignites the fire can be something small, a new, particularly insulting tax, the brutal actions of a local lord, a rumor that the king's council is planning to enforce serfdom even more harshly, and suddenly the simmering resentment boils over into open revolt. It starts in one village. A tax collector is killed. The local manor house is burned to the ground. But this time, The fire doesn't go out, it spreads. Neighboring villages, hearing the news, rise up as well. Within weeks, you have a full-blown peasant army on your hands. This is not a disciplined military force. It is a mob armed with what they can find: pitchforks, scythes, wood-cutting axes and hunting bows. But they have two things on their side: overwhelming numbers and a righteous, desperate fury. They march across the countryside, their ranks swelling as they go. They burn court records and tax rolls, symbols of their oppression. They hunt down and kill lords, lawyers, and any official associated with your government. Their violence is often indiscriminate and brutal, a mirror image of the cruelty they have suffered for so long. The two most famous examples of this are the French Jacquerie of 1358 and the English peasants' revolt of 1381. The Jacquerie was a short-lived, but incredibly violent uprising. The nobles, who initially derided the peasants as Jacques Bonhomme, the generic, simple-minded peasant, were caught completely by surprise. The peasants attacked castles, slaughtering the inhabitants with a ferocity that shocked the ruling class to its core. The English revolt was more organized. Under leaders like Wat Tyler, a massive army of commoners marched on London. They had a clear set of demands: an end to serfdom, the repeal of the hated poll tax, and the removal of the king's evil councillors. As king, or as the faction ruling in the king's name, your reaction is a mixture of panic and contempt. You are terrified by the scale of the uprising, but you're also deeply offended. These are your subjects, your inferiors. They are like farm animals who have suddenly decided to storm the farmhouse. It is an inversion of the natural order of the world. Your initial attempts to negotiate are likely a delaying tactic. In England, the young King Richard I famously rode out to meet with the rebels at Smithfield. It was an incredibly brave or foolish act. During the tense negotiations, the rebel leader Wat Tyler was killed by the mayor of London. The crowd was about to surge forward, but the 14-year-old king rode towards them and, according to the chroniclers, shouted, "Sirs, will you shoot your king? I am your captain, follow me." He managed to lead them out of the city, diffusing the immediate crisis. Here's a small, poignant detail from that revolt. One of the rebels' demands was for a Charter of Liberties, a written guarantee of their rights. King Richard granted them these charters. The rebels, many of whom were illiterate but understood the power of a sealed royal document, took them and went home, believing they had won. As soon as the rebellion had dispersed, the king and his nobles revoked every single charter and began a campaign of brutal retribution. The historical debate on these revolts centers on their ultimate success or failure. On the surface, they were all catastrophic failures. They were all eventually crushed with merciless brutality. The leaders were executed, and the rebels were hunted down and slaughtered. The old order was violently reimposed. The Jacquerie was put down in a few weeks by the assembled knights of France, who took a terrible revenge. However, some historians argue that despite their immediate failure, these revolts had a profound long-term impact. They put a deep and lasting fear into the hearts of the ruling class. The nobles and the king realized that there was a limit to what the peasantry would endure. While serfdom wasn't abolished overnight, the memory of the revolt accelerated its decline. Landlords became more willing to commute labor services for cash rents, and the idea of imposing new poll taxes became politically toxic for a very long time. The peasants lost the battle, but their uprising may have subtly changed the war. From your perspective on the throne, the revolt is the ultimate betrayal. It's a failure of the system of fear you have so carefully constructed. You have spent your reign terrifying your nobles, but you forgot about the vast, silent majority at the bottom. You saw them as a resource to be shared, not a force to be shared. The rebellion is crushed, of course. Your knights, armored and trained, will always defeat a mob of farmers. You will make an example of the ringleaders. You will restore order, but a crack has appeared in the foundation of your world. The peasants have shown that they can rise up, and you will forever be haunted by the memory of their burning anger, and the chilling question they dared to ask: who then is the gentleman? The peasant revolt has been crushed. The countryside is quiet again, cowed by a wave of brutal reprisals. You have proven that the pitchfork is no match for the lance. But in dealing with the uprising, You have likely overstepped your bounds and alienated a group far more dangerous to you than the peasantry, your own nobles. In your panic to restore order and raise funds, perhaps you levied a new tax without their consent. Perhaps you seized the lands of a few lords you accused of sympathizing with the rebels. Perhaps you simply used the crisis as an excuse to consolidate your own power, ignoring the traditional rights and counsel of your great barons. You have broken the unwritten rules of the game, and the nobles who stood with you to crush the common folk are now turning their angry, suspicious eyes on you. This is a different kind of challenge. A peasant revolt is a force of nature, a wildfire that burns hot and fast. A noble conspiracy is a slow-acting poison. It is a calculated, political movement led by men who have castles, armies, and a deep understanding of power. They don't want to overthrow the system, they want to control you, the king, within that system. The discontent begins in secret meetings, in quiet letters passed between castles. They are your peers, the great magnates of the realm, the Duke of Gloucester, the Earl of Warwick, the powerful Percy family in the north. They feel that you have become a tyrant, not just to the common people, but to them. You are ruling arbitrarily, without regard for their ancient liberties. You are listening to a small circle of low-born, sycophantic advisors instead of your hereditary council of nobles. You are, in short, a king who has forgotten his place. They form a coalition. They might try to confront you politically at first. At a meeting of the Great Council or Parliament, they present you with a list of grievances, a set of demands. They want you to dismiss your unpopular advisors. They want you to agree to new limitations on your power to tax. They want a guarantee that you will respect their lands and titles. This is a direct challenge to your authority. Your every instinct screams to arrest them for treason, to make an example of them as you did with that traitorous duke years ago. But this is different. This isn't one over-ambitious rival, this is a united front of the most powerful men in your kingdom. If you move against them, they will raise their armies, and you will have a civil war on your hands, a war you might not win. This is the exact scenario that led to one of the most significant moments in the history of the Western world, the sealing of the Magna Carta in 1215. King John of England was a classic tyrant king. He was arbitrary, he was cruel, and he was unsuccessful in his wars, which made him lose the respect of his barons. After years of his abuses, a powerful coalition of nobles finally cornered him. They rebelled, captured London, and forced him to meet them in a meadow called Runnymede. There, they presented him with the Articles of the Barons, which would become the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. It was essentially a peace treaty between the king and his rebellious subjects. And it was a stunning document. It declared that the king was not above the law. It established that no free man could be imprisoned, deprived of property, or outlawed, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. This is the seed of the concept of due process. It also established that the king could not levy most new taxes without the general consent of the realm. Here's a little-known fact that puts the Magna Carta in perspective. King John had absolutely no intention of honoring it. He signed it under duress, and as soon as the barons dispersed, he sent a letter to the Pope, who promptly declared the charter null and void, calling it shameful and demeaning to the king. The charter's immediate effect was to plunge the kingdom straight into a civil war. It was only after John's death a year later that the charter was reissued by his sons regents as a way to gain support, and it was then that it began its long journey to becoming a sacred symbol of liberty. The historical debate around Magna Carta is rich. Was it a revolutionary document, a blueprint for constitutional government and individual rights, or was it, as some historians argue, a deeply conservative and selfish document? They point out that the charter was primarily concerned with protecting the rights and privileges of a tiny elite, the barons. The phrase "no freeman" did not apply to the vast majority of the population, who were free serfs. Magna Carta wasn't about liberty for all, it was about the barons protecting their own feudal interests from a predatory king. Regardless of its original intent, the principle it established was revolutionary. The king is subject to the law. So now you stand before your assembled barons. They have their own version of a charter. They are demanding their rights. You have a choice. You can be like King John, fight them and risk losing everything. Or you can do what he did initially, you can concede. You can sign the document. You can promise to be a better king. You swallow your pride, your rage, your tyrannical instincts. You agree to their terms. You ride away from the meeting seething. You have been humbled. Your divine authority has been challenged and constrained, not by God, but by your own subjects. They have put a leash on you. For the moment, you will abide by it. You will play the part of the chastened, reformed ruler. But you are a tyrant at heart. You are already looking for ways to circumvent the charter. You are already plotting your revenge against the men who dared to put you in chains. The war between absolute royal power and the constrained power of the law has just begun, and you have just lost the first major battle. You've been humbled by your nobles. You've been forced to accept limits on your power to sign away a piece of your tyranny on a scrap of parchment. You might spend the rest of your reign trying to claw back that power, playing a long, bitter game of political chess with your barons. But whether you succeed or fail, one fact remains inescapable: your time is running out. The body natural, that frail human part of you, is getting old. And for a tyrant king, the end of the road is rarely a peaceful one. The image of a beloved old king dying peacefully in his bed, surrounded by his loving family and loyal subjects, is a fairy tale. The reality for men like you is often something far grimmer. The cruelty, paranoia, and violence that defined your reign have a nasty habit of coming back to haunt you in your final days. Let's consider a few possible endings for you. Each is lonely, and each is a direct consequence of the life you've led. The first, and perhaps most common, ending is death by disease, but a disease amplified by the psychological burdens of your reign. You are old now. The years of constant stress, the rich food and wine, the weight of your own crimes have taken their toll. You are plagued by ailments, perhaps gout, which feels like your joints are on fire, or a painful affliction of the bowels. Your physicians, with their primitive knowledge, can offer little more than prayers and foul-tasting herbal concoctions. As you lie in your great bed, you are not surrounded by love. You are surrounded by vultures. Your eldest son, the one you've always suspected, is no longer hiding his impatience. He and his allies are already behaving as if you are dead, making plans, dividing up the spoils of the next reign. The servants who attend you do so out of duty, no faces impassive. They move quietly around your sick room, their faces impassive. You are utterly alone, trapped in a failing body, in a room full of people who are just waiting for you to die. Your power, once absolute, has evaporated. You can no longer even command your own body to obey you. Your last days are a slow, painful, humiliating fade into irrelevance. Another possible ending is more sudden and violent assassination. You may have survived the plots of your youth, but you have made countless enemies over the decades. The son of a duke you executed 30 years ago has been patiently waiting for his revenge. A faction at court, terrified of what will happen if your equally cruel son takes the throne, decides that the only way to break the cycle is to eliminate you both. You let your guard down for a moment, and a dagger finds its mark. Built on violence, ends in violence. Or perhaps the cruelest ending of all is the one where you are not killed, but simply deposed. This is the fate that befell King Edward II of England. He was not a strong tyrant like his father, but a weakened, incompetent one, who alienated his nobles by lavishing power and wealth on his personal favorites. His reign was a disaster. Eventually his own wife, Queen Isabella, who history would remember as the she-wolf of France, had enough. She took a lover, the powerful Baron Roger Mortimer, and together they raised an army and invaded England. Edward's support crumbled. He was captured and forced to abdicate the throne in favor of his young son. He is a particularly chilling detail of that abdication. It was a highly theatrical, public ceremony. Edward was brought before Parliament, dressed in black, and he was made to weep and confess his own unworthiness to be king. He was ritually stripped of his power, his reign declared over. He was then imprisoned. His death soon after in Berkeley Castle is the subject of lurid and probably untrue rumors. But what is certain is that he died a prisoner, a king who had been utterly and publicly broken by his wife and her allies. Historians debate the final days of many tyrant kings because the accounts are so often written by the victors. The chronicles describing the lonely, miserable death of a hated king are often moralizing tales designed to show that God's justice will always prevail. It's a form of post-mortem propaganda. Did Richard I really say a horse? A horse. My kingdom for a horse. My kingdom for a horse Worthfield probably not. A playwright working under the Tudor dynasty that had defeated Richard. It was designed to paint him as a desperate, pathetic figure in his final moments. The true nature of his death was likely far more brutal and less poetic. The truth is, we can't know the state of your soul as you face the end. But we can see the political reality. You have spent your life treating people as objects, as pawns in your game. You have burned every bridge of genuine human affection. You have taught everyone around you that power is the only thing that matters. Why would you expect them to behave any differently now? Why would you expect loyalty, love, or mercy when you have so rarely yourself? You lie there, in your cold, stone-walled chamber. The crown sits on a velvet cushion nearby, a heavy, inanimate object that has cost you everything. You look back on your life, the wars, the betrayals, the executions, the vast sums of money you acquired. You have held absolute power. You have made the world tremble. And now, at the end of it all, you are just a frightened, lonely old man, waiting for a darkness from which no king, however powerful, has ever returned. The tyrant's final reward is to die alone. You are dead. Your long, brutal, and consequential reign is over. The body natural lies cold, about to be encased in lead and buried with all the pomp and ceremony befitting a king. But your other self, the body politic, has already moved on, seamlessly inhabiting your air. The cry of the king is dead, long live the king, echoes through the halls. But your story is far from over. In fact, one of the most vicious fights is just beginning, the battle for your legacy. How will history remember you? The answer depends entirely on who writes it. And history in this era is not an objective, academic pursuit. It is a tool, a weapon, used to legitimize the present and shape the future. The first and most important historians of your reign will be the monks. In the quiet scriptorium of a major monastery, a monk sits hunched over a sheet of vellum. By the light of a candle, he is scratching out the history of your reign with a sharpened quill. He is your kingdom's memory. But he is not an unbiased observer. His monastery might have flourished under your rule, perhaps you gave it land, or funded the building of a new chapel after that particularly bloody battle you needed to atone for. In this case, he will likely portray you as a strong, if stern ruler. He will praise your piety, your commitment to justice as he saw it, and your military prowess. Your massacres will be framed as necessary acts to restore order. Your crippling taxes will be glossed over as the unfortunate cost of defending the realm. You will become the great, a pillar of strength who, despite some human flaws, was a true servant of God. But what if you were a king who clashed with the church? What if you seized their lands, defied a pope, or had an archbishop murdered? In that case, the monastic chroniclers will destroy you. You will be remembered as a godless tyrant, a monster who consorted with demons. Every rumor, every piece of court gossip, every accusation ever leveled against you will be recorded as fact. Your fits of temper will become proof of demonic possession. Your political savvy will be twisted into satanic cunning. King John, who so famously battled the church, was savaged by the monastic writers. They painted him as the epitome of a wicked king, a portrayal that has stuck with him for 800 years. Then there is the official history, commissioned by your successor. Your son, the new king, has a vested interest in how you are remembered. If his claim to the throne is secure and he loved you, he will want your reign to be seen as a golden age, because it legitimizes his own inheritance. He will commission poems and songs that praise your deeds. He will build a magnificent tomb for you, a testament to your greatness. But what if your successor is from a rival dynasty that has overthrown yours? What if he is Henry to die? At the Battle of Bosworth Field, then his entire claim to the throne rests on the idea that you were an illegitimate, monstrous tyrant. He needs you to be a villain. So his court historians, men like Polydore, Virgil and Sir Thomas More, will embark on a systematic character assassination. They will take the rumors about you like the story that you murdered your own nephews, the princes in the tower, and present them as undeniable fact. They will invent stories about your monstrous birth, your deformed body, anything to make you seem unnatural and evil. This is how Richard II, a complex medieval ruler, was transformed into the hunchbacked, child-killing villain of Shakespeare's play. It was Tudor propaganda, pure and simple. And here's a fascinating little detail about how history can be physically erased: the practice of damnatio memoriae, or the damnation of memory. This was a concept inherited from the Romans. If a ruler was declared an enemy of the state after his death, his statues would be torn down, his name would be chiseled off inscriptions, and his face would be scratched from paintings. The goal was to literally wipe him from the historical record. While less formal in the medieval period, the same impulse existed. A new dynasty might tear down the castles of the old one, or replace their coats of arms with their own, slowly erasing the physical presence of their predecessors. The historical debate around a figure like you is, therefore, less about what you actually did, and more about untangling the layers of propaganda and bias in the sources that describe you. Modern historians have to act like detectives. They have to ask who wrote this chronicle, when did they write it, who was their patron, what was their political agenda. They might compare the hostile monastic chronicles with the more neutral financial records from your government. The chronicles say you were a reckless spendthrift. The treasury accounts might show you were actually a careful and prudent manager. Somewhere between the villain of the Tudor historians and the hero of your own loyalists lies the real you. But the truth is, the popular memory of you will not be shaped by careful academic debate. It will be shaped by the most compelling story. It will be shaped by Shakespeare. It will be shaped by the fairy tales that need a wicked king as a foil for the virtuous hero. Your life was a complex tapestry of piety and cruelty, of statecraft and sin. But history has no time for nuance. It will flatten you into a caricature. You will be remembered either as a saint or a monster, a hero or a villain. The final, and perhaps most profound, cruelty of your reign is that you do not get to write your own epitaph. The person you truly were is buried, and a legend, either bright or dark, is erected upon your grave. The battle for your legacy rages on, long after your bones have turned to dust. You have been recast as a villain or a hero, a cautionary tale or a founding father. But as the centuries turn, something more fundamental begins to change. The entire world that made your particular brand of tyranny possible starts to slowly, almost imperceptibly, dissolve. The age of the all-powerful, arbitrary king is coming to an end, not with a bang, but with a long, slow fade. The seeds of this change were sown in your own lifetime. Remember that charter your barons forced you to sign. That document, the Magna Carta, was reissued again and again by your successors. Each time, it became less a temporary peace treaty and more a permanent statement of principle. The idea that the king is subject to the law, that he cannot rule by whim alone, begins to take root. It becomes the foundation for a new kind of political structure, the constitutional monarchy. Arduous development of institutions like Parliament in England creates a formal, permanent check on royal power. You could ignore your great council if you were powerful enough. Future kings would find it much harder to ignore a parliament that controlled the nation's finances. The very nature of warfare, the engine of your glory and cruelty, is also changing. The rise of disciplined infantry, armed with pikes and longbows, proved to defeat a charge of noble knights. The invention and proliferation of gunpowder and cannons rendered the stone walls of a lord's castle obsolete. A king with a royal artillery train could batter down the fortress of any rebellious duke. This seems like it would increase your power, and in the short term, it does. But it also shifts the focus of military power from a network of nobles to a centralized, state-funded army. War becomes less about feudal obligation and more about national enterprise, further strengthening the institutions that will eventually constrain you. There's also a profound shift in the world of ideas. The Renaissance brings a renewed interest in the classical world, in the republics of Greece and Rome. Thinkers begin to question the divine right of kings, proposing new theories of government based on social contracts and the consent of the governed. The printing press, invented a bit after your time, allows these radical new ideas to spread like wildfire, far beyond the confines of the monastery or the university. You could control what the monks in your scriptorium wrote. It's much harder to control 1,000 printing presses churning out political pamphlets. And the church, your partner and rival in power, The institution that gave you the sacred oil of anointment is about to be shattered by the Reformation. The idea of a single, unified Christendom with a Pope at its head collapses. The religious authority that underpinned your divine right is fragmented, unquestioned. All these forces, legal, military, intellectual, and religious, are working together to dismantle the world you knew. The intense, personal, and arbitrary power you wielded is slowly being replaced by a more impersonal, bureaucratic, and rule-based form of government. The state is growing, and as it grows, it is no longer just an extension of your personal will. It is becoming its own entity, with its own logic, its own army of clerks, lawyers, and its own army of clerks, lawyers, and administrators. Here's a small, symbolic detail that illustrates this shift: the change in royal seals. In your time, the king's seal, pressed into wax, was the ultimate sign of his personal authority. A document with your seal on it was your will made manifest. In later centuries, the king's seal is slowly replaced by a whole host of departmental seals: the seal of the treasury, the seal of the judiciary. Power is being diffused, institutionalized. Historians call this long, complex process the rise of the modern state, and they still debate its exact timeline and causes. Was it driven by military innovation, by economic changes, by new political ideas? The answer, of course, is that it was all of these things at once, a complex interplay of forces that slowly eroded the foundations of medieval kingship. The world was simply becoming too complex to be run by the whims of a single individual, no matter how divine his right to rule was. Does this mean cruelty and tyranny disappeared from the world? Absolutely not. They just changed their form. The 20th century would produce tyrants whose cruelty, amplified by modern technology and bureaucracy, would dwarf anything you could have accomplished with your executioner's axe and your dungeons. They would slaughter millions, not thousands, but their tyranny of ideology, of the party, of the impersonal state machine. Your brand of tyranny, the intimate, personal cruelty of a single, crowned man who believed he was chosen by God and whose temper could doom a city. That age has passed. It has become the stuff of history, of legend, a story to be told at night. We have walked with you from your coronation to your lonely deathbed. We have seen the world through your paranoid, powerful eyes. We've seen the heavy crown, the bloody ladder to the throne, the fear in the eyes of your subjects, and the slow, inevitable decay of your own humanity. Your world of divine right and absolute power has faded, leaving behind only echoes and the enduring lesson that power, when untethered from learned humanity, will always, eventually, consume the one who wields it. And now, the story is over. The echoes of battlefields and echoing halls begin to fade. The heavy velvet robes and the even heavier crown dissolved into the quiet darkness of your room. The journey is done. You can feel the weight of all that history, all that struggle beginning to lift, like a morning mist burning away under a gentle sun. The figures we walked with, the kings, the peasants, the knights, they recede back into the pages of their chronicles, their fierce passions cooling into silent ink on parchment. The world of sharp steel and cold stone softens at the edges, its anxieties and its fears no longer yours to carry. Let your mind drift away from the narrative now. Let the details blur, the names, the dates, the specific grievances. They can all float away. What remains is just a feeling, a sense of distance, a quiet understanding. The frantic, desperate energy of their world gives way to the calm, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Feel the gentle weight of your blanket, the softness of your pillow. The low hum of the fan, or the quiet stillness of the night outside your window, is the only sound that matters now. You are safe. You are here, in your own time, in your own peaceful space. The ghosts of those tyrant kings have no power here. They were just shadows we called up for a little while, and now we let them go, back into the deep well of the past. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing to fear. There is only the gentle, easy slide into sleep. Your own story for tonight is ending, and it ends in peace, in quiet, in rest. The end of the article. Good night.